Now, I've already talked about Nightreign more than I ever wanted to across a couple of videos in the past, even having a full character arc of coming to terms with what I think the product really is at the end of the day, which to me is a somewhat fun, fake, fan-made FromSoft game that I don't really care all that much about. It didn't focus on the tight, fast-paced, and engaging boss fights that I consider to be peak FromSoft content, and overall it had a much more infinite meaningless content vibe to support the random roguelike model, which is the exact opposite style of content I wanted to see from FromSoft. In fact, I would say that one of the quintessential reasons that FromSoft games felt like a huge breath of fresh air to me when I first started loving them is because previously to discovering the meaningful satisfaction of completing Dark Souls, I had gone completely hollow through overexposure to soulless, infinitely replayable games like Destiny 2. And so my final takeaway from Nightreign was, it's not for me, but it's kind of fun, I guess. I don't knock anyone for liking it, but I'm here today to say, I'm sorry. I was wrong about Nightreign. I was wrong to think of it as something I could just ignore. I was wrong to tuck my tail between my legs, put on a fake smile, and hide behind the statement, it's just not for me. I was wrong for not giving Nightreign the full criticism it deserves, because there's something wrong with Nightreign. And I just didn't care enough at the time to say that with my chest. I think I was just tired of people thinking that I'm just a Debbie Downer who can't enjoy anything. I'll have you know, I fucking love Elden Ring, even if that's a normie opinion and even if there's plenty of room to criticize it. Overall, Elden Ring elevated the Souls formula to new heights. The combat was more refined than it had ever been. There are more S-tier bosses in Elden Ring than most of Souls combined, and the world offered an unprecedented scale of adventure, while also fulfilling the cramped, difficult-to-traverse, enemy-filled vibe of Dark Souls within its legacy dungeons. I mean, Stormveil Castle is almost as large and complex as the first half of DS1. There's a laundry list of things I could say about Elden Ring, both good and bad, and I've never been afraid to criticize Elden Ring, or any other From product for that matter. Godskin Duo, Fire Giant, and Gideon are god-awful encounters that probably should have been reworked before release. But they don't even begin to tip the scales against everything that Elden Ring did right. Elden Ring absolutely stands up to criticism. But Nightreign, I don't think it even got the chance to see any real criticism, maybe until just now. There were so many layers of protective padding between Nightreign and reality, which muted any complaints until it all fell on deaf ears. The phrase, just let people enjoy things, comes to mind. Add to that the very unfortunate state that video game content creation is in, within which creators are financially motivated to give softball reviews, so as to never tank their chances of being invited to events or receiving games absurdly early, almost guaranteeing a positive review. Nightreign's immunity from proper criticism was also bolstered by the very strange, ill-defined nature of its gameplay design, which was exemplified by the time investment necessary to fully understand what the game is, alongside the content release model of having many subsequent drops of content which would each evolve the game's identity in a minor way. Video game journalists, as well as the general FromSoft community, were either forced to no-life the game to an unhealthy degree in order to have realistic complaints and criticisms, or just give the most sterile, non-inflammatory review of the game ever made. And in hindsight, I include myself in doing that, unfortunately. And so I think the entire Souls community was split into two distinct groups of opinion. You either don't care about Nightreign at all, you never bought it, or only played for a while, before moving on and hoping that the next From game is something more your speed. Or you didn't care about its faults and play it indefinitely because it's the Souls game right now, and you are a Souls player. Notice that both sides don't really care about Nightreign to a degree. I think that Nightreign is best served with a side of lobotomy. Just shut your brain off and play the Souls slop. But that concept is completely antithetical to how I analyze and criticize games. In fact, I would argue that I criticize the ones I like more than the ones I don't, because I care more. I want them to be the best games that they can possibly be. And it absolutely sucks to see something fail when it should have been great. Millennia's Waterfowl is artificially difficult and undermines what would have been a great boss. Finding out that Bloodborne was mid as fuck was a huge kick in the nuts after years of hearing people glaze the fuck out of it. And Shadow of the Erdtree, well, Shadow of the Erdtree actually made me depressed for a while. What a sad state of affairs that shit was. I've always been the guy who shits on the popular thing because I care more about the larger scale ramifications of said thing than I do about the instant gratification which that thing provides. Whenever there was an overpowered weapon within the sandbox of Destiny, I was the first person to criticize the weapon for reducing the value of the rest of the sandbox. Rather than indulging and overvaluing the experience of using the weapon, a mindset which inevitably memified the weapon until the devs brought it back permanently, catering to the mindless player base who will soon wonder why the game doesn't feel special anymore. The same type of players who cheered when Ark made Wyverns breedable. Yeah, it's a great idea to remove all the aspects that made Wyverns a unique experience to obtain and a powerful reward for a difficult task. I don't spend nearly enough time in my base in this survival sandbox game. What's that? You need some ascendant kibble? Oh yeah, give me 5 minutes, I'll bring you about 300. At the end of the day, there is no greater insult that I could give to Nightreign than to say I don't care about it. It is chopped to the brim with assets ripped directly from my favorite game. I couldn't even bring myself to call whoever's responsible for this mess lazy, thieving, talentless scumbags. However, two things work together to change my mindset in regards to critiquing Nightreign. The first being the introduction of the enhanced bosses, paired with the introduction of the Deep of Night mode. Nightreign is clearly insisting that it's a difficult game, that it's a true Souls game. And one of my core philosophies about Souls has always been that difficulty demands quality. Without quality, all that remains is shit, and the more difficult something is to play when lacking quality, the more shit it is. The second change to Nightreign, which provoked me to make this video, is the recently released $15 DLC, which is made up of mostly assets from the god-awful Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Now, to me, a premium DLC means one thing. It is a statement doubling down that Nightreign is a real FromSoft product. No more can I squint my eyes and ignore that the devs ever said that Nightreign was canon, or that the $40 price tag of the copy-paste game exists. I've mentioned several times now that Nightreign should have been free, that it should have been included with Shadow of the Erdtree as a bit of bonus content. Meant to satisfy the audience they've let down with their half-assed work within the DLC. I will never forgive FromSoft for releasing Shadow with a non-functional final boss. Quite possibly the final piece of real, actually real Elden Ring content, the pinnacle moment of the Elden Ring experience, and the most difficult challenge in the entire game, built on a lie and rushed, sloppy coding. I can't believe that people found it impressive that the game director for Nightreign beat all of the Night Lords without relics equipped. It's the bare minimum for the guy who's in charge of making the bosses, or at least has a direct line of information about the bosses, to be able to beat them. Motherfucker knows exactly how each move works, and somehow even the Slop Games director has a better understanding of his game than whoever the fuck designed Discount Radon. Took me 10 minutes to realize the boss wasn't working as intended, and then 12 more hours to finally no-hit him? I want my half a day back, you fucking hacks. Anyway, all of this is to say that Nightreign should have been free. It should have been a welcomed apology. I absolutely stand by that. But instead, we're expected to pay for a bunch of content we already own, only to be met with a $15 DLC made up of content we already own. And I mean, why wouldn't they put a price tag on it? It sold 2 million units. $30 million of revenue from an audience of players fully willing to bend over the barrel for their favorite company without complaint. You can absolutely bet that From would be willing to make another one if it wasn't for the unfortunate fact they've ran out of assets to steal. The bottom line is, releasing a premium DLC asserts this game as real, and if it's real, then it's real enough to criticize. It's supposed to be real, and it's supposed to be difficult, and therefore deserves every word of this video essay. I didn't care about Nightreign. It exhausted me. I just couldn't bring myself to play it enough to properly hate it. But I do care about FromSoft. I love FromSoft games. FromSoft was to me the light at the end of a tunnel made from the living corpses of my favorite games, all made meaningless through corporate interest enabled by fan bases willing to overlook mediocrity. And even if I speculate that From is headed directly down that same path, I refuse to simply give up on FromSoft. I've never known when to give up. But what I do know is that if we're willing to suck down this slop without recourse, we are dooming Souls games to an eternity of cash grab content. What everyone needs to realize is the phrase "don't yuck somebody's yum" goes both ways. Don't imply that your low standards and inability to properly criticize something means that corporations should cater to you. They've ripped apart the most meaningful games I've ever played so they can wear their skin and pretend that it's just an homage. And the nail in that coffin was the moment they monetized it. From could have given this away for free and it would have been some fun, wholesome, unoffensive community mod content. But they didn't. Corporate greed fueled this vivisection and desecration of the Souls series and Elden Ring. And if you're okay with that, then you're not a true Souls fan. You're a tourist and you're littering the side of Mount Everest. You can't truly love something without criticizing it. If your child was sick and you ignored it just to pretend that they're perfect, they would lock your ass up for child abuse. Blind patriotism is a mental illness. You should be upset about Nightreign. You should be upset about Nightreign even if you like it. Hell, I'm willing to admit that I like it. It's not the worst way to spend a couple hours with some friends every now and then. But that in no way makes up for either the price tag or the reused assets. One or the other would have been fine. A completely unique game with a host of new bosses and mini-bosses for $40 would be fine. And a copy-paste game for free would have been fine. The combination of the two is unacceptable, and the only thing that we can hope for is that the content itself is high quality, despite the content model being unethical. And so, let's begin a full critique of Elden Ring Nightreign, from release to what I assume will be the end of its full support post-Forsaken Hollows. I might be wrong about that though, if they find a way to flip more assets into a second premium DLC. And let me just say up front, no, I didn't get to rank 5 in Deep of Night, okay? This shit takes hours and hours to play. I don't think I really need to prove myself by wasting my life away grinding the exact same run of Nightreign over and over, carrying useless, uninformed teammates through the ranks, and watching my finite lifespan melt away 2 hours or more at a time with every single loss. Just to prove I know my stuff about Souls games and the Nightreign formula, okay, I think I deserve a little more respect than that by now, right? I've beaten Elden Ring without taking a hit, while also never losing a single point of health, which meant no Red Tearstone, no Seppuku, no Lord of Blood's Exaltation or White Mask, no status ailments, nothing. I've beaten it rune level 1, I've beaten just about every single Souls boss hitless, including Discount Radahn, week 1, while his undodgeable move was still undodgeable. I think I've earned some respect on my name. But no, I suppose I haven't, because the second I complained about the unbalanced difficulty in the Lies of P DLC, everyone ignored everything else I had to say about the DLC, including the fact that half of the bosses didn't even have fury moves or meaningful breakable weapons. I don't know how the fuck any Lies of P fan could play through that DLC without realizing that it was barely Lies of P gameplay. It might as well have been any other Souls-like slop with arguably no distinction between their dodges and their deflection. Fucking Lords of the Fallen quality DLC, but no, everyone thinks it's great because Moist Charlie secured the white boy opinion and called it a masterpiece. The cherry on top was the moment when the devs did rebalance the DLC's difficulty, justifying my criticisms, but at that point, it was too late. I'll probably never play that DLC again. So no, I suppose I don't have any respect on my name, do I? Nobody will listen to me unless I prove myself. God fucking damn it! Do you know how long it takes to play through rank 5 even if you were to win every single match? Do you know how demoralizing it is to lose 500 or more points to a lower ranked match because you spent the entire time reviving your teammates 30 plus times? Do you know how hard it is to rank up at this point in the game when anyone who plays in rank 4 is accurately ranked as a rank 4 player? Do you know how difficult it is to find teammates who know the DLC fights in a post-Forsaken Hollows Deep of Night? Well, now I do. Let's begin. But just before we get to that, I would like to make a wager with you, specifically if you are a dedicated Nightreign fan. You see, I sometimes have a hard time picturing exactly who my videos are for when I make them, and I frequently run into problems where in hindsight I realize there is no initial audience for a video I've made about a game I'm critiquing. Armored Core, for example, is a game with a pretty specific niche audience, and very little overlap between more standard Souls fans. When I critiqued Armored Core, I was coming from a place where my rose-tinted glasses had just recently been snatched from my face. Just being a FromSoft game wasn't enough for me anymore in a post-Shadow of the Erdtree world, the time at which I decided to make that video. I was reviewing a very simplistic game that I claimed looked easy to make, which was shipped at full price. And let me just be clear here, I was never happy with Armored Core even before Shadow. I was just simply more willing to overlook its low quality and ignore its existence entirely. And so when I released that video, which I at least considered to be very fair and honest, I soon realized that there was no real audience for content like that about Armored Core. There are exactly two types of people in relation to Armored Core. People who like the concept enough to play it and defend it, and people who don't give a single shit about it, nowhere near enough to ever even consider watching a video critiquing it. Now I'd like to think that there's usually a happy middle ground where my audience exists. People who enjoy FromSoft enough to be invested in whatever they release, without drinking the Kool-Aid, and placing every piece of shoddy FromSoft content on a pedestal, out of reach from any potential pesky criticism that might taint the unrealistic image From cult members have towards some of this lesser content. Unfortunately, I think Nightreign might be the same story as Armored Core. I think you're either invested entirely, you fully bought into the concept and don't want to hear any criticism, or you're not watching this video because you just don't care at all about Nightreign, certainly not enough to want to watch a long-form dissection of it. Maybe I'm wrong, in fact, like often is the case, I hope I'm wrong. However, I have two things I would like to ask you to hedge my bets for this video, which I've poured tons of cum, sweat, and tears into, in hopes that it does well. I have a wager for you. I bet that I can change your opinion of Nightreign within this video. I bet by the end of this video, we are mostly in agreement, even if you're a huge Nightreign fan. After all, we should mostly have the same motivations in relation to our opinions of FromSoft content, right? We both want FromSoft to succeed, and we both want From to be able to create better and better pieces of art for us for the foreseeable future. And so, if you're able to watch this entire video, and if you still think my opinions are wrong, let me know in the comments. And for every comment I receive which says, watch this whole piece of crap video and I still think you're fat, dumb, and wrong, I will play one more round of Deep of Night. Which should be a win-win, right? I believe this video is good enough to rally people together with a cohesive message, and I believe that it speaks for itself if you give it a chance. And you likely believe that Nightreign is a good enough game that playing it should speak for itself. If I'm wrong and you're right, I'll play more Nightreign and apparently I'll enjoy it. But if you're wrong and I'm right, you'll have consumed a video that leaves you well informed. So that's the wager. And if this video blows up and I get trolled a ton in the comments, I guess I'll just have to make a subsequent video called Playing 1000 Rounds of Nightreign Because the Internet Hates Me, or something. On top of that, I would like to ask you to share this video around to anyone you might think cares about FromSoft, but maybe doesn't care about Nightreign. Hopefully they'll find value within the insight I can share about Nightreign as someone who feels like they've infiltrated this strange, insulated community that requires no-lifing just to properly understand and criticize. I went deep, and I made it back with as much of my sanity as I could manage. And so, let's begin a full, honest, overly invested critique of Nightreign. I remember exactly where I was the first time I saw the trailer for Elden Ring Nightreign. I was playing Hunt Showdown, filming a video for the Post Malone event, when I received a message from my friend Darth Geber, asking me if I'd seen the trailer for FromSoft's new game, which he described as, well, a lot of things. It was hard to understand exactly what the game was going to be at that point, and I was in a rather unfortunate mindset when it came to FromSoft at that point. Coming off of Shadow of the Erdtree, I was more than disappointed with the most recent product that From had released, if you couldn't tell. And near the end of my There's Something Wrong with Shadow of the Erdtree analysis video, I speculated my fears that if FromSoft were to sell out from this point forward, then Shadow of the Erdtree was the subtle moment where it all began. The moment that From phoned in the most important piece of content of their careers, which could have elevated their magnum opus Elden Ring to new heights, but instead was an empty, hollow experience collecting arbitrarily important pieces of bark to increase your damage, while fighting mostly reskinned mini-bosses or mini-bosses pulled directly from the base game, mindlessly wailing on fire baskets, and finally reaching a handful of decent remembrance bosses, but more often than not, a mini-boss with its difficulty artificially inflated, ultimately culminating in the undisputed king of half-assed design, Radon Prime. My greatest speculation about the current organization of FromSoft is that the massive success of Elden Ring and the subsequent influx of revenue led FromSoft to increase the size of their development team, which to me means diluting the overall creativity, talent, and experience of the core From team as they onboard fresh-faced members into the company, which is the only way I could possibly think to rationalize the overall lack of quality that Shadow shipped with. I speculated that Shadow was developed by some kind of a B team, pushing the less financially valuable DLC content onto a less experienced group of devs, while the rest of the team began working on new IPs. And again, all of this was simple speculation on my part as I attempted to process the fumbling of an expansion to one of the greatest games of all time. But then, almost as if the universe was mocking my speculation by confirming it in the most obvious way imaginable, Nightreign comes to be, a cash grab copy-paste game almost certainly made by a B team of inexperienced community mod members, with oversight from a more experienced legacy dev. My initial criticism of Nightreign was heavily focused on how the game's design constantly contradicted itself, and if there's anything I stand by within that review, that would be it. Nightreign has absolutely no idea what it wants to be, and that's largely due to it being a Frankenstein's monster of Elden Ring assets, reused within a roguelike model which, in practice, fails to mesh well with the combat that the assets were originally designed around. Patience is a virtue in Souls, and it's one of the most important foundational skill sets that Souls players learn to embrace. However, patience can't be a virtue within the ticking clock framework of Nightreign's gameplay mechanics. This is most obvious when fighting the frustrating bosses that have longer movement phases between standard melee combat, such as the Flying Dragon's sweeping fire attacks, the Magma Worm's lava charge, the Knight's Cavalry fucking around on his horsey, the Deathrite Bird and Blackblade Kindred flying around and backstepping every chance they get. As well as that, any boss you're not appropriately leveled or geared for, you shouldn't even bother attempting at that point. There is no glory in overcoming a more difficult challenge if the cost was a proportionally wasteful chunk of your precious time during a night cycle. It's logically most valuable to fight random adds and mini-bosses time and time again, before even thinking about taking on a formidable opponent. Even if you have the skills to overcome a difficult fight, there's no point in stressing yourself, and that's one point deducted from the game's intended design, which is attempting to be this random, fun roguelike. Every single run starts exactly the same way, and if you attempt to deviate from that formula, you're playing the game wrong, and you'll suffer the consequences. In fact, arguably the worst start imaginable and the only attempt that Nightreign makes to shake up the starting point system is when you begin the match on an extra Church of America, get a free flask charge, but only get 2 rats to fight, leaving you at level 1 searching for more basic enemies in the area and time-wise at a disadvantage for the rest of the run. All for a flask that you might not even need if you know the bosses well enough. The fact is, the all-important foundational patience aspect of Souls combat has been shattered by the timed nature of Nightraign's gameplay, and in my opinion, the entire Souls combat formula has crumbled alongside it. You cannot rush Souls combat. It is antithetical to the very nature of FromSoft's games. You're supposed to be this little ant facing off against gods, nipping at their ankles, knowing that a single misstep would be your end. But with perseverance and the undead curse on your side, you will inevitably overcome any challenge before you. However, in Nightreign, you just don't have time for that shit. And so, what's the answer to this gameplay conundrum? Well, what if the player was instead a dude with a fucking tactical nuke strapped to his wrist that renders him invincible for the duration of the blast? You see, Nightreign fills the void left from the gruesome excision of patience from its combat by replacing that skill with powerful player abilities, mostly meant to subvert boss movesets almost entirely if you're playing to your full potential, that is. The classic example would be to run 3 Wilders and then chain an ultimate into a critical alongside free damage from the other 2 players wailing on the defenseless enemy, followed by another ult, another crit, more free damage, and then repeat the cycle once again until the boss is fully reduced to the pathetic punching bag that Nightreign had degraded it into. Basically every character has their own version of this in 1 or more abilities designed to subvert actual boss combat, and instead bebop the fuck out of everything. Executor has his Sekiro mode for building stagger, as well as his dog form for mostly risk-free damage on lower difficulties and one final big staggering hit. Raider has a useless big rock and a punch that I believe makes him invincible. Duchess has a combination of relic abilities which allow her to avoid damage when activating her restage ability, allowing you more options to finish the chain of dagger attacks, activating another restage, offering her entire team 50% more damage, status buildup, and stagger damage for a substantial time. On and on, I think you get it. The bottom line is, and the most poignant realization to make about Nightreign, is that it's just not a Souls game. It doesn't use Souls combat, and if you're playing the game and it feels like Souls combat, then either your gameplay, your teammates, or your team composition is wrong. You're not playing the game right, or not playing to your full potential. Too many players holding onto their ults for clutches or revives, you'll be playing Souls combat, and you'll be more likely to fail because of it. Players whiffing their ults or missing crit windows or getting downed when you should be punishing the boss, and you'll be playing Souls combat. If you want to understand just how skewed the Nightreign player base is in terms of what they understand Souls combat to be, look no further than the unbridled universal fear that the community has towards the bell-bearing hunter. A fucking simplistic, easy-to-learn mini-boss from Elden Ring is considered the boogeyman of this baby game. And why? Simply because he is the only boss that ignores the instant stagger caused by an ultimate. He is the only boss that forces you to use mostly standard Souls combat to beat him. And every Nightreign player shits their diapers the second they see him. There's one thing I'm absolutely sick of when it comes to this game. It's the insistence that Wilders are aura farming with their freebie iframe ultimates. I'm sorry, but I'm right, and it's probably gonna hurt people's feelings. You cannot farm aura while invincible. That's like hiring hookers and then claiming you're a pussy slayer. There's nothing funnier to me than the moment a Wilder tries that same shit on BBH and gets instantly humbled by a fucking mini-boss. The way I see it, the far more accurate way to describe the combat in Nightreign is to call it 3-player hack and slash. It is considerably closer to something like Black Myth Wukong, where you're given insanely powerful abilities meant to chain stagger bosses in cinematic but ultimately simplistic ways, than it is to Souls. And the massive contradiction in Nightreign's game design in relation to its combat systems is that you spend the entire timed portion of the game with hack and slash mindset, ironically fighting Elden Ring bosses. Bosses that were originally designed to be approached with Elden Ring's combat in mind. And only after beating all of that are you placed against a non-timed fight with the Night Lords that are considerably more simplistic, more sloppy, and yet you are given an infinite amount of time to beat them, and their health bars are big enough to mostly shake off ultimate staggers and crits without much worry. And with that in mind, let's once again go over the Night Lords and the massive contradiction that they represent. Nightlords are supposed to be these larger-than-life boss fights that each represent the final boss of the miniature playthrough you've just endured within an expedition. They're flashy and difficult to approach and learn given the 40-minute runback that's placed between you and each attempt. And so, with that in mind, it's unfortunate yet understandable that these fights cannot be anything other than a simplistic fight with a stunted moveset and gimmicky mechanics. If they were anything more than that, you wouldn't be able to learn them without an absurd time investment or busy work in the form of external research. I mentioned this in my original video, but there's only a couple of Nightlords that have a larger moveset than even the most basic mini-boss in Elden Ring. The flying dragons are more complex than most of the Nightlords. Again, I see this as a huge failure and contradiction of game design that shows a lack of vision involved with this project. Nightlords are one of the few moments where slower, more patience-focused Souls-style combat takes center stage, and even then the combat cannot begin to get its engine running without stalling out against the underdeveloped, restrictive gameplay mechanics of Nightreign. Most Nightlords only offer moves which require single dodges or positioning solutions to their attacks, and that's without even considering the burst sprint which is added to the combat of Nightreign, which allows you to basically subvert most positioning solutions because you can quickly sprint away from basically any dangerous situation. The closest thing to an engaging Nightlord fight is the Night aspect, which offers more direct combos, but loses the value of those combos when forced to deal with another of this game's failures, which is that every boss designed for this game has to be able to directly threaten 3 players at once at basically any given moment. In the Night Aspect's case, this results in the asshole flopping around within his combos, making him less predictable to any player he's not directly targeting. But often that just makes him seem unfocused and less engaging to the player he should be engaging with. In other Nightlords cases, they solve the 3-player issue by simply splitting up and making it a gank fight with multiple simplistic shitty bosses that only become threatening whatsoever when their aggros get mixed up or their attacks intertwine between multiple players. And the final trick up the Nightlord's sleeves when it comes to being a big fat sloppy threat to 3 players at once is to implement what I call the Nightreign Explosive Diarrhea Streak. This fucking slop move gets shit out onto the field by such a ridiculous amount of Nightlords in a variety of ways, and it has never once been interesting, well-telegraphed, unique, or even remotely well-designed. Unless, that is, you count Adele's Gravity Wave attack within the category of Explosive Diarrhea Streak, which I do not. Specifically because it's actually well designed, unlike the rest of this garbage. The difference is that Adele's explosive AoEs have a very distinct wave of damage that's clearly telegraphed from a single source, instead of being spammed all over the place, originating from God knows where with a timing of God knows when. On top of that, Adele's moves are jumpable, and you could at least, in theory, with some risk, be within range of him to land a jump attack while avoiding the move. There is at least some potential there for the move to be even the slightest bit engaging. And that's too much to ask for the rest of the Nightlords. What a fucking joke. And that's without mentioning the overall problem that the majority of Nightlords have with visual telegraphs. Some of which are just pretty bad, like Caligo's Ice Breath sweeps, which have no physical presence to scale them against, making it hard to define just how close the breath is to you without flipping your camera to a near top-down perspective. And I would say the same of the Augur's water attacks. They're all just so visually cluttered and ill-defined physically, it's always frustrating to be hit by them. In other cases, the telegraph is near non-existent from a practical sense, requiring you to just know the timing from experience rather than reacting to visual information, such as any of the larger diarrhea streak attacks, anything with a wave of PNG explosions, and the ball dunk attacks from the Dreglord, which are designed to be intentionally misleading, and I'll expand on that later when I talk more directly about Forsaken Hollows. Now, maybe this is unnecessary, but I do want to touch on each Nightlord individually, albeit very briefly. I'd like to think that deep down most people realize that the Nightlords are very simplistic and gimmicky, and that most people understand how the expedition model has stunted their potential design. However, I do want to be thorough, so let's do a mostly quick lightning round of boss design criticism. Starting with Gladius, who has a simplistic moveset, huge degrees of attack overlap within its gank scenarios, and diarrhea moves. Then Adele, whose jumpable lightning attacks are pretty cool, but otherwise his unfocused moveset is avoidable with positioning through single dodges at a time, including his grab attacks. Next is Gnoster, two bosses whose movesets can almost entirely be avoided with positioning through single dodges at a time, with ridiculously hard to perceive sources of damage through its poison clouds, who, within Phase 2, merge into a boss that requires no strategy other than spanking its ass and dodging the single move it can hit you with until it roars and initiates its spammy ultimate attack. Then we have Augur, a shitty gimmick, Libra, a decent fight with a stinky side of bullet hell and a convoluted deal gimmick, which is largely a trap outside of specific deals, which you'll likely have to do external research to fully understand. Fulgor, one of the more straightforward fights, outside of his staggerable charged attack, which results in unfocused random damage AoEs unless broken with his lightning weakness, as well as his easily avoidable but nonetheless poorly telegraphed diarrhea streak attack. I will give credit where it's due, however, and mention that his jumpable slam moves are appreciated, yet were not designed in an intentional enough way, rarely resulting in an opening to turn the tables on the move with a jump attack, reducing the overall engagement within the fight to a degree. And since I've already covered Heelster, lastly we have Caligo, which is a special case and requires more explanation to clearly critique. You see, throughout Souls games, there has always been dragon fights. However, early on, they were all pretty shitty, to be honest. Instead of the player being a challenger that the boss is directly facing despite the power discrepancy between you, dragon fights in early Souls games made you feel much more like a nuisance that the dragon is trying to shake off, using large breath attacks or tail sweeps similar to a dog scratching a flea off of itself. Gameplay-wise, you would often find yourself attacking whatever leg was most stationary while remaining vigilant to avoid whatever field-sweeping attack would soon come your way. The result is obviously a fight that breaks the immersion that you're going toe-to-toe with a legendary beast, instead feeling more like you've exploited the simplistic moveset of a poorly designed yet cinematic boss, which then awards you with a hollow victory. Eventually, however, From managed to invent a simple unspoken rule when it came to designing dragon-like fights, which would exponentially increase the engagement, the spectacle, and the satisfaction of beating these bosses, which is: the dragon's head takes more damage. That's it. And it's fucking genius. With a focused, intentional design, FromSoft was able to create a greater echelon of dragon enemies, which would fight you directly, using moves purposely made to attack a player directly in front of it, then reward the player's commitment to the battle at hand by offering openings to attack the dragon's head, allowing you to deal appropriate damage. Conversely, players who attempted to weasel their way out of a direct fight and attack the dragon's legs were treated like the fleas they were attempting to be, and were punished with more unavoidable area of effect attacks, as well as significantly less DPS. The result is a clear discrepancy between low-tier fodder dragons, which fail to implement a clear distinction between head damage and leg damage, such as the flying dragons spread throughout the less important content within Elden Ring, and the higher-tier dragon fights, the S-tier dragon fights like Midir, Phase 1 Nameless King, and Bale. I don't think I really need to explain to you where Caligo fits into this equation. Just think back to the last time you fought him. It was an unengaging mess with a moveset that was mostly subverted through positioning and damage mostly dealt to his legs. It is barely a fight that feels like a dragon is attacking you. He's just spraying shit everywhere regardless of where you are. He is a low-tier dragon fight on a fundamental, foundational level. He is Borealis the Freezing Fog with scoliosis. There isn't a single Nightlord fight that comes even remotely close to being a good boss fight. In fact, I wouldn't even call them boss fights from today's standards. They are mini-bosses with irritable bowel syndrome. Here, let me just show you how easy it is to design these pieces of shit. Let's take the Bell-Bearing Hunter, increase his health, make his sword longer, make him staggerable with ults, make him flop around more within his combos, and finally add explosive diarrhea streaks to all of his magic sword moves. There, easily the best Night Lord in the game from one of the most forgettable mini-bosses in Elden Ring. Now, one thing I wanted to talk about before I move on, purely because I find it interesting, is how this game bizarrely seems to be designed to punish you for actually playing it. A blind run on new Night Lords or new enhanced versions of one is extremely unadvisable, when the alternative of watching a guide or a data miner's explanation of mechanics is a far more efficient option. And that seems to be the case for the majority of the content in Nightreign, whether that be in relation to boss movesets, which are better studied before attempting, especially so in Deep of Night, or understanding the limitations of how certain passive buffs are implemented, such as how the successive attacks negate damage passive works, which is that multiple copies of said passive increase the total single hit damage resistance you'll have, but also, without mention, increases the total amount of successive hits you have to land before the buff will activate at all, effectively nerfing you outside of fringe moments with multiple massive openings. The average person playing Nightreign wouldn't have the time to test out exactly how each and every passive effect plays out, especially when combined with each other, and wouldn't understand why exactly they fail to run through purely playing the game. It's a frustrating system of complicated moving parts which can only be realistically learned through external research, mostly obtained from data miners. And that's largely due to the titanic amount of tedious content that one must play through every time they decide to once again pick up Nightreign and play through an expedition. I'll reiterate, the starting point system is a mindless chore, hacking through enemies that can only be considered even remotely dangerous when played against the absolute chode of a health bar you're given at level 1. I would be absolutely thrilled to never have to waste another 30 seconds of my life playing through this meaningless bit of content over and over and over again, at the start of every single expedition. And of course the alternative is to spawn on the Marika Point or the shittier side of the DLC, which gives you 2 free talismans, but both of these alternatives nerf you in terms of options to level up early. From a dev perspective, the most simple and obvious solution to all of this is just to remove level 1 entirely, readjust player levels so that level 1 is at level 2 stats, and then spawn the players randomly without the first camp, letting them choose to directly take on whichever compound they wish. But that only brings us to the next layer of tedium. The compounds themselves are largely a similar level of mindlessly hacking apart enemies or engaging in a routine of demolishing a certain aspect of the compound in a specific way. The flame chariots will always be killed with a single jump attack. The Oracle envoys should almost always be dealt with within a single ultimate before they become separated. Invader compounds should almost always only be farmed for their invaders and approached from specific angles to avoid the aggros of enemy placements within that compound, and then promptly exited from without killing anything else unless you become fairly overpowered at that point. In my experience, the damage resistance of the enemies within invader compounds is considerably higher than the rune value of killing them would be. As well as that, you get pretty sizable rune drops from invaders, which is best leveled from before having to fight a compound boss and risk losing them. So every invader compound plays out exactly the same. Kill the invaders and then dip. In fact, I would say that every single compound in the entire game plays out the exact same every time you will ever complete them, with the slim exception of personal failures like getting downed. There is nothing interesting or random about the compounds, and the more you play the game, the more that reality becomes apparent. And so, I'll say with confidence that you could easily cut out Night 1 entirely from the Nightreign experience, and the game would be better off for it. Instead, you could just spawn on the Night 1 boss with adjusted stats to reflect an appropriate challenge, which could, upon its defeat, drop like 6 blue dormant power nodes alongside the standard passive buff dormant power dropped by the Night 1 fights, effectively reducing 14 minutes of meaningless tedium from every single expedition. Of course, with that same mindset, Night 2 is not much better in terms of offering interesting gameplay. Ideally, you'll spend the rest of your run using 3-player hack and slash tactics to demolish every single formidable opponent you can manage within the time limit. And while these bosses are ripped from Elden Ring, and therefore some are reasonably well made, I can't say that they offer much of an engaging, heart-pounding battle given the circumstances. And so, with marginally less confidence, I'll say Night 2 could just as easily be skipped, and the game would be better off for it. In fact, skipping both night sequences and instead fighting 2 end night bosses back to back, followed by a Night Lord, would unironically open up so much potential for this game. The Night Lords could be designed in a considerably more complex way, and taking advantage of the lack of a ticking clock in a much less contradictive way than they're currently designed. They wouldn't have to entirely rely on explosive diarrhea streak attacks to develop a level of difficulty and spectacle. And all of this is just an attempt to somewhat mitigate some of the internal conflict fundamentally baked into the design of this game. It feels like it's in a perpetual argument with itself, with some features like the explorable map and RNG loot being entirely focused on being random, and therefore, let's face it, being unfair, unbalanced, and wacky, and others like the end night bosses and the Night Lords, insisting that the game is challenging and therefore should be fair and balanced and taken seriously. And before anyone mentions it, yes, Souls games were always designed to be fair, and the further the Souls formula was developed, the more fair the games became. I've actually had arguments before with people who claim that Souls games were intended to be unfair. They're just meant to punish you. And I cannot imagine a more insulting outlook on Souls than that. An opinion that completely overlooks and undermines the effort and talent of the devs who worked hard to make Souls combat great. Personally, I blame Miyazaki for this mindset, with his endless, meaningless soothsayer sentiments about how he loves dying in games. I really hate to break this to you. I hate to say it myself. But Miyazaki is the Elon Musk of the games industry. I seriously doubt he has had a considerable amount of meaningful input on Souls games design since DS1. He's a meme and little more than that, and I think it's clear that the team working below him were a much more significant force in refining the Souls formula to what it is today. And that's not even to say that DS1 was all that unfair at the end of the day. Its combat is kind of boring and simplistic, but just about every single attack has a direct intended answer, even though that might be sloppy at times. The only massive exception is Artorias' bullshit slam move, which was designed to ignore iframes, which sucks, but again, is an exception that proves the rule. I think we all need to take a step back and appreciate just how fair Souls combat is compared to other games that existed at the time. Souls has forever changed the way that I look at gaming, and forever raised the bar as to what I consider an acceptable challenge. I recently played Borderlands 2, which is a great game, but the combat is largely just a sloppy shooter where finding cover is the main source of avoiding damage. And when that combat is taken to the extreme, you're met with the raid boss Terramorphous, an encounter that is quite literally impossible without grinding gear to an appropriate level. There were no intended mechanics in play to avoid the damage that Terramorphous deals, aside from soaking damage with a high-level shield, and basic strafing. There were no developer-intended answers to the individual moves that Terramorphous employs, and no consideration for how those moves combined to create unavoidable damage. I at one time considered this to be perfectly acceptable, at a time before the dodge roll became a cultural juggernaut in the gaming scene, and before my eyes were open to the idea of mechanics over numbers within game design. In hindsight, the Terramorphous fight is wholly based on numbers over mechanics. You have to have high enough stats to deal with this fight, without which you will not succeed no matter the level of player skill you possess. Compare that to even DS1, and players were able to systematically beat the entire game at level 1 without getting hit. I believe that Souls was a huge wake-up call to the industry, where gamers in mass discovered that they not only wanted a challenge, but a challenge that was well enough designed to be approached with even more challenge layers on top, and to still overcome it because the foundation of the game is built on fairness. And that's not to say that DS1 is entirely fair across the board. I have plenty of complaints, and challenge runners have an equal amount of unintended mechanics at their disposal to subvert shitty design. My point is that Dark Souls resonated with players because of its feedback loop of challenge and fairness. You do the right thing with the right timing, and you will succeed. And, excluding DS2, the further the games progressed, the more challenging they became, and alongside that, they became increasingly more thoughtfully designed. Hitboxes became tighter and combat mechanics expanded, offering a wider and more complex sandbox of developer-intended tools at your disposal, ultimately culminating in Sekiro, a game where every single move in the entire game undisputedly has a direct developer-intended answer to it, and it is arguably the most challenging game in From's catalog. My point is, Souls has always exemplified fair gameplay, and every moment where that comes into question is a moment where the cracks in game design start to show. Well, cut to where we're at now, and Nightreign is a game where the majority of your time in-game will be spent within the random roguelike aspect of the game, where nothing is designed to be fair. You could either have the perfect run where everything goes your way, or a run where you get absolutely nothing worthwhile from your loot drops. Your build is basically non-existent with passives that don't apply to the playstyle you're running, with a raid event that has impeded your progress, pulling you away from potential flask charges, and you've obtained no source of damage negation and no source of weakness damage for the Night Lord. And my point is in no way to say that it's impossible to overcome these obstacles. I've certainly had some ridiculous clutches in moments where my teammates had already given up. I've had a Deep of Night 4 run where we were at level 4 at Night 1 with base starting weapons fighting the Centipede Demon, where I revived my teammates 14 times, only to finish the run on a Sentient Pest where I got another 20 revives. It's certainly possible to overcome the odds. I'm not saying it isn't. My point is that you can't have a game where half of it is focused on silly random RNG bullshit gameplay, and the other is focused on tight challenging boss fights. These are diametrically opposed concepts. They cannot find any sense of cohesion when both exist in the same game, and in doing so, both aspects of Nightreign have suffered immensely. As I've said, the Nightlord fights cannot be difficult, complex, well-designed fights because they have to be at least approachable with less than optimal gear, at lower levels than you might want, all with mechanics and movesets that are graspable within a handful of runs. And the roguelike aspects of the game cannot live up to their wacky randomized potential because everything has to be just balanced enough to make any run redeemable. But in practice, this just makes both nights of the Nightreign Expedition experience so fucking formulaic and boring. You will always fight the starting dudes, then always fight compounds. You'll always collect reasonable flask charges that aren't too far away to justify the time investment, and then, finally, you'll do a big boss rush of 3-player hack-and-slash combat with every formidable opponent within reach on the map. I would say there are like 2 actually interesting situations that can come to be through the RNG roguelike elements in this game, and both of them are unintended, essentially exploits. The first is to obtain either a Day 1 Marias Executioner's or Grafted Greatsword, and the second is to succeed in a Night 1 Sentient Pest raid. And both scenarios require you to have a specific infinite ad spawning boss to appear as a Night 1 boss, either Wormface or Duke's Dear Freya, and even though these exploits are pretty overpowered, they're not even that interesting in practice. You either just end up with a ton of HP, a ton of weapon damage, or a ton of runes, and that's it. Outside of those 2 rare instances, you'll be greatly encouraged to stick to the same boring formula, playing the same run of Nightreign's night cycles every single expedition. There are only 2 gameplay-based exceptions to that formula, which I'll quickly cover because I've already talked about them within my original review. And if you watched that review, you might be thinking to yourself at this point, Jester, you handsome rogue. Jester, you doddering old fool. Jester, you silly racial slur that I am not going to repeat, and quite frankly, you shouldn't be thinking. Anyway, Jester, you're repeating a lot of stuff you've already said in the past, and that's true. I do stand by a lot of the minor criticisms I made within my original review. However, I just don't think I was able to, at the time, tie all of those critiques together with a nice tight bow. I was missing a ton of information we would eventually unveil, as well as context of further Nightreign content that would eventually be released, to be able to make the comprehensive review video that this video is supposed to be. I truly hope that the redundant repeating of information isn't all that bothersome to you, but we're almost through all of that, and should soon move on to, first, topics I failed to touch on in the original, and second, the post-release Nightreign content that I haven't really talked about until now. And so the last two things I have to repeat from my original video are my opinions about the raid events and the shifting Earth map mechanic. Two aspects which I see as opposite ends of the spectrum of switch-ups to the formula made to offer a thinly veiled notion that this game isn't the most boring piece of shit ever created. Let's start with the raid events, which are actually pretty awesome most of the time. The worst aspect of most of them is that they're going to pull you in specific directions outside of an optimal route you might have wanted to take. And I don't necessarily see that as a negative, being that the raid events are designed to be disruptive and chaotic. However, that is entirely dependent on the overall benefit obtained by the time the event has ended. Certain events are debatable whether or not it's worth even completing them at all, like the new Fire Dog raid, which has your team traveling to 3 separate locations, obviously a large time investment, but rewards you with a buff to stamina as well as 3 sizable rune drops. However, the time that this event takes is directly taken away from the time that you would otherwise be farming dormant power loot drops. And so you might find yourself at the end of that run with less than optimal gear. Certain events are also just so simple and easy that there's really nothing to them, such as the Caligo and the Pest raid, which only requires you to reach the enemy and then wail on them a bit. As well as that, their buffs are pretty passive, which leaves the whole event feeling like a nothing burger. I hate using that word, nothing burger, especially after that meme came out claiming that you could have just used the word nothing, but because American, add burger, which is fucking dumb. I thought it was obvious that the nothing burger doesn't just mean nothing. It means 2 buns, which open to reveal nothing. No patty, no lettuce, no condiments, nothing. You open up the wrapper and take a big bite expecting a delicious burger, only to have a mouthful of dry bread. A nothing burger. The expectation and implication that there's supposed to be contents within the concept, but the concept was all that was given. There was no substance. Here, let me fix the tweet for you. I could have just thought about the phrase for 2 seconds, but somehow ended up looking more stupid than even fat-ass Americans do. And that's honestly impressive, I'll give you that. Anyway, I wanted to mention that because the phrase is a really useful colloquial term for describing something specifically disappointing in regards to its functional content. And you're never going to believe this, but I'm going to be using it throughout this video, because a ton of Nightreign content is smoke and mirrors illusion of choice bullshit. Nightreign is the nothing burger king, and that includes some of its raids, which is a real shame. The raid system at its best is one of the few things that can get your heart pumping for a moment within the night cycle of Nightreign's gameplay. The pass or fail system of offering a reward or punishment is unique in being completely disruptive to your generic boring Nightreign run that you've ran 1,000 times. And the more free-form nature of how they spawn, especially the Fell Omen raid, is one of the few moments where the game somewhat succeeds in being unpredictable and random. And the only sad part is just how dampened a lot of these encounters must be in order to fit the rigid nature of the whole run being one unit with a singular goal at the end. You're not allowed to have too much fun during the roguelike parts of the game because that wouldn't mesh with a balanced final boss. The raids can't take up too much time, they can't offer too hard of a punishment for failing, they can't spawn too randomly, and they can't offer too good of a reward for completing. And so I think they all kind of end up as junior bacon nothing burgers. Some are kind of fun to fight, like the Gladius one, which encourages you to split up, whittle down each boss, and finish them all around the same time to avoid the Fire Dog ads. Some have layers to them, like the Libra raid, which could either be killed to avoid the negative effect, dropping a talisman dormant power, or could be bribed, which then offers a bonus deal with no negative effects, who can then also be killed on top of that for the same talisman dormant power. But at the end of the day, almost all of the raids are neutered to fit within the rigid, conflicted gameplay loop of Nightreign. And now that brings me to the final aspect of the roguelike, night cycle randomized formula shaking up mechanic of Nightreign, which is the shifting Earth, which is the single dumbest addition to this game in my opinion, and one of the most baffling contradictions of game design I have ever witnessed. A mechanic that is directly designed to offer a respite from the absolutely boring generic cookie-cutter playthrough of Nightreign's standard map night cycle gameplay ends up establishing the undeniably most formulaic, mind-numbingly static Night 2 gameplay imaginable within a random roguelike game. First of all, your Night 1 boss will almost always be at the exact opposite side of the map as the shifting Earth. meaning you won't touch the Shifting Earth area until Night 2. On top of that, the Shifting Earth area removes any compounds and America points, except for the static one you'll passively grab on your way through the crater map. But in total, this means you'll have no reason to enter that area of the map within Night 1, which means your functional Night 1 map is a quarter smaller than the base games would be, or in the case of the crater, like half as big. I've never seen anyone reach the top left or right of the map during the Shifting Earth, because it would be a huge wasteful time investment. You would end up going well out of your way, just have to run all the way back to meet the predictable Night 1 boss zone at the bottom of the map. After beating which, you'll basically always be encouraged to immediately begin completing the Shifting Earth area, which has gone untouched till then. The only exceptions would be finishing off bosses you were interrupted from defeating by the storm circles closing or grabbing convenient nearby Maracas. Other than that, you would be a fool not to attempt to complete the full Shifting Earth area within a preordained, researched run that is undoubtedly the most efficient for obtaining everything and fighting every boss within the area, which you looked up online for each of the 3 non-random Shifting Earth events, just like you've been encouraged to look up everything else about this game. The only Shifting Earth that has a sliver of random design to it is the Rotted Woods, which is just easy enough to clear manually by starting on one side, moving boss to boss, finding the power along the way. The powers are another aspect which makes these Shifting Earth events incredibly static and offensive towards the implied infinite replayability of Nightreign. They are most often a decent enough reward to be worth obtaining on their own, especially the free revive from the city event. Why wouldn't you go for the power? Why wouldn't you run the perfect route through the Shifting Earth, obtaining hella runes and loot drops from predictable static bosses? And most of all, why would you have any reason whatsoever to do anything else Night 2 when you know for a fact where the Night 2 final boss circle is going to be? Directly inside the Shifting Earth's area at the very end of your 14-minute prefabricated route through this supposedly random game. I think a considerably less restrictive model for the Shifting Earths would be for it to simply replace the center castle with an equally sized alternative dungeon, offering an optional, valuable area to complete if you have the time, which wouldn't overshadow the slightly less static gameplay of the original map. You could clear certain areas as you pass through in Night 1, just like many players do within the center castle, and then return to finish it off when better equipped. The fact is that any alternative attempt to shake things up would be better than what we received within the Shifting Earth mechanics. I really never thought it was asking all that much for there to be multiple full Nightreign maps, made up of the assets within different areas of Elden Ring's world. It wouldn't be asking a lot for there to be a full Caelid map, a full Liurnia map, Altus, the capital, Consecrated Nokron, Farum Azula, on and on different maps. But I suppose the copy-paste function was worn down too much on the Nightreign dev team's keyboards, so they had to quit at one single map with a ridiculously dim-witted modification system to that map that they called Shifting Earth. And that's it. That covers every aspect of the Night Cycle roguelike portion of Nightreign's gameplay. And it fucking sucks as a roguelike. If it wasn't so tethered to the pointless concept of pretending that the final Nightlord fight is some intense, complex challenge to overcome, it could have been designed with a little life in its gameplay. Could have been wacky to the point where no 2 runs are the same, but occasionally some runs are so absurd that they're basically unbeatable. It could have actually catered to the audience it was meant for and provided a casual Mario Party-esque atmosphere where nothing matters and everything is a hilarious sandbox, with multiple raids per night, some of which you're going to strategically fail and accept the consequences of while prioritizing others. There could have been randomized modifiers to each run, both positive and negative, rolled within a slot machine type visual while flying in. Or they could have created a much more standard roguelike experience by using the assets from Elden Ring's minor dungeons to create a more infinite dungeon crawler type game that gets increasingly difficult and unreasonable the further down you get, with boss rooms every so often and more special larger deep root depths or Lake of Rot style chambers every so often. But you couldn't design anything random and fun like that without foregoing the Nightlord portion of the game. And that's not to even say that I would enjoy a game like that. But I wasn't the one who decided to make a shitty copy-paste game into a cash grab attempt to profit off of the trendy video game genre of modern times. The Nightreign devs were. I would have much preferred the alternate vision of design I mentioned earlier, where two well-polished end-of-night bosses would each drop a ton of loot for you to quickly make a build against a more competently designed, complex Nightlord fight. Instead, we got the infinite nothing burger that is the open-world section of the two-night system of Nightreign, an abrasively static, balanced formula of killing the starting point adds, farming compounds, and then hack and slashing your way through formidable opponents. Every single run will be nearly identical in terms of that formula, and every subsequent run will be that much less valuable to you, as you walk in your own footsteps to complete the same mundane tasks you've completed countless times before, all designed to needlessly fulfill the arbitrary requirement of making this game feel like a microcosmic version of an Elden Ring playthrough. Now, I'll be the first person to admit that I've played too many playthroughs of Elden Ring. Over 100, the majority of which were challenge runs or failed no-hit attempts, and the majority of which were pretty meaningless in reality. I was playing the game with my own motivations in mind, external to the actual enjoyment I was receiving from the game. That being said, I don't regret any of those playthroughs, because they all had their own purpose, exposing me to new areas of the game I hadn't seen before, or just giving me one extra bit of experience I needed to finally complete a full no-hit. Every single time I chose to make a new character and replay through my favorite game of all time, there was a direct, meaningful reason I was doing so. I've played as an astrologer class without leveling up. I've played bow only. I've played drink when you die and almost died in real life while live streaming the playthrough. I've completed 100% playthroughs, collecting every item, beating every boss. I've done the Mimic Tier Challenge, Rune Level 1, and God knows how many more random challenge run swaps and completion races against my boy iBootyJuice. Every challenge ever ran within Elden Ring is going to be unique, taking you through a different route through this world, obtaining items specifically useful to you within that run, which were intentionally and thoughtfully placed within areas or behind encounters. For example, as an unleveled astrologer, I first found myself scouring Rhea Lucaria for many items that would increase my intelligence and whatever highest level spells I might be able to cast. I had to fight an extremely difficult and therefore extremely memorable battle with the Red Wolf to make progress there, all of which was a unique experience compared to any other playthrough I've done. Within my Mimic Tier runs, I had to use every bit of knowledge I possibly had about the world of Elden Ring to obtain useful items, and develop a strategic path of progression through the game so that I could meet the stat requirements to become any boss I defeated. The bottom line is, every single time I've picked up Elden Ring, it was meaningful to me. There would be no other reason to play it again if it weren't. And for some stupid fucking reason, the Nightreign devs thought they could encapsulate that experience within the most boring, static, meaningless mockery of a grotesque imitation of an Elden Ring playthrough imaginable. The starting points all feel the same, the compounds all feel the same, the mini-bosses, excluding BBH, all feel the same, and the formidable opponents all feel the fucking same. Every single run of Nightreign feels exactly the same. The one singular aspect of the formula that might shake things up a bit is the combat itself, and the variations between the combat of casting, melee, shield pokes, or bows, all of which, in another massive contradiction of design, has been gutted from the gameplay portion of your pseudo-Elden Ring run and preordained within the character system and your relic build. I just don't fucking get it. Is this game even trying to attempt to be an actual roguelike? One of the few aspects that can greatly change how an Elden Ring run plays out is the difference between the different builds you might play as. Why the fuck would you design a roguelike game where that entire system takes place in the main fucking menu? The way things stand, you either end up with the same static weapons that best suit your build, best suit your character, and take advantage of your relic buffs, or you don't. And your run fucking sucks. Those are the only two outcomes in regards to loot. If I'm running a Balancer Relic Ash of War based Executor build focused on successive attacks increase damage and negate incoming damage buffs, I either end up with a Rivers of Blood or I'm fucked. I'm a useless, shitty teammate not pulling my weight. There is no pivoting to a caster build halfway through because I happen to get a cool combination of spell-based passives. My character and my build isn't going to facilitate that as a meaningful source of damage. Nightreign being the hero shooter or whatever this genre of game is, where you pick a static built character before the gameplay even begins, has done untold damage to what the Nightreign formula could have been. Untold damage to the replayability of this game. The characters were undisputedly a stupid idea. And that's not to say that they're not good characters. They're all pretty interesting and fun. Except Guardian. Why the fuck is the tank character a fucking bird? They have hollow bones. He's the heaviest character and can somehow fly? Just take the equipment off and carry the team to the Americas, you selfish asshole. I'm obviously joking. The characters are really cool for the most part. I love that the community loves them and latches on to all the funny little intricacies or quirks that surround them. The silliness of a strength build Revenant does not go unappreciated. However, with that in mind, I feel like I must point out that the extremely nebulous way that Nightreign was designed has left it room for unending amounts of excuses available to anyone interested enough to invoke them. I can complain about the simplicity of the Night Lords and be met with the excuse that it's just how the game had to be made. I could discuss the laziness of reusing Elden Ring mini-boss assets, and you could just say, what's the point of making something new that will ultimately be pitted against hack-and-slash combat? I can analyze the raid or shifting earth events, and you could just tell me not to complete them. I can critique the loot system, and you can tell me to just use something bad and to get good. Within this game, which was made with such little vision, there is always going to be wiggle room to escape from any harsh reality. However, keep in mind, every excuse is in itself an admission that this game does not stand on its own two legs. It needs an endless supply of excuses to avoid the ugly truth that it isn't good enough to be a FromSoft game. And the one aspect of the game that truly does stand on its own and have a level of polish that you would expect from an official FromSoft product is the characters, which unfortunately have to act as this paper-thin but well-crafted mask, hiding the mod quality content that exists underneath. And that is just so absolutely pathetic, considering that the game would unequivocally be better as a roguelike, a better game without the characters. Let me just take 5 minutes to describe to you the obvious way this game should have been designed if it had been designed with any vision whatsoever and was attempting to be a competent roguelike. You load up the game for the first time, and you create a character, a unique character that represents you, and then you enter the Round Table Hold as the newest Nightfarer amongst the veteran characters who would work well as standard NPCs. You start up an expedition where every loot drop is a choice, leading you to your eventual full build, whatever playstyle of combat was your best options given, or potentially a weaker build with equipment that you feel more comfortable with. You hit a site of grace, and instead of the meaningless mashing of buttons you always do in current Nightreign, you stop for a moment and make meaningful choices in which stats you want to level, which stats will best suit your current build. And of course, the merchants could then sell larval tier items, allowing you to respec if your build changes by the end of the run. It really would be this simple to add a huge degree of replayability alongside bolstering the roguelike concept of this game. But continuing this hypothetical, inevitably you fail your first attempt in an expedition, lacking any of the abilities the NPC characters possess, which could bring you back to the Round Table and give you a quest marker above, let's say, Wilder's Head, where he would console you on your failures by offering you a hand-me-down of his equipment, his ult, his skill, and his passive. Instead of giving you 4 characters to choose from at the beginning of the game, Nightreign could have offered you a chance to learn each skill, ult, and passive from each of the characters as you interact with them and complete their remembrance quests. There would have been a level of progression, which is missing from current Nightreign, where you're actively obtaining useful abilities to add to your arsenal as you play through the main game's content. Equipment passed down from the NPC character Nightfarers, which you could mix and match to create a build uniquely suited to the Night Lord at hand. There's not a lot of utility for many character skills under certain conditions within specific Night Lord fights, like almost all of them within the enhanced auger fight, and so it would be pretty awesome to be able to switch out a useless skill for a useful one without having to change your alt or vice versa. It would be interesting to see players choose between something like Wilder's Free Death Sixth Sense passive, which is a pretty low skill but undeniably useful option, or something systemically more advantageous across the board but higher risk, like Duchess's Magnificent Poise dodge. The way I see it, Nightreign has left a massive amount of its potential to go to waste by being a character-based game. Once again, a decision that is contradictory to the intended premise of the game, resulting in a loot-based roguelike where the loot only has two options, either being useful towards your unchanging static build, or being garbage tossed to the ground. Now there's one remaining aspect of Nightreign's design that I wanted to talk about, which I've never talked about before, in depth at least. However, before we get to that, we'll first hear a word from today's sponsor. Has this ever happened to you? Oh fuck, I have shitloads of this pointless, conceptually undefined currency in my pockets. If only there was a way I could slowly get rid of it through an unsatisfying chore that feels like filing paperwork. Fuck, shit, fuck. Are you tired of video game progression systems and upgrade mechanics that feel rewarding, immersive, and intuitive? Well, fuck my greasy ass, I sure am. I hate thoughtful design. I want something convoluted as fuck and meaningless. Well, boy, do I have a gameplay mechanic for you. Introducing relic stones, or whatever the fuck they're supposed to be. Fuck you. Stones, but also sometimes pieces of equipment, but also sometimes manhole covers depicting the Night Lords. Whatever, we didn't think about it when making them. Why should you when playing our $40 copy-paste game? No longer do you have to stress yourself with intuitive and immersive gameplay systems separated into the distinct roles that each item represents, with an implied tangibility representing the item's functionality. Yuck, ew. Instead, we jammed every single potential upgrade into the same system for maximum convenience. Well, actually, don't you think that might undermine some of the most fundamental gameplay systems? Shut the fuck up, you stupid bitch. Equipment changes. It's in the stone. Passive buffs, stone, build adjustments, stone, talisman buffs, stones, great rune effects, stone. What more could you possibly want from an infinitely playable game's only form of progression? So what are you waiting for? Get yours today with discount code JesterLovesCock. Ah, what the fuck? Get yours today at full price and then sell them all back, prolonging the busy work even further. Relic stones. They're probably better than nothing. TMCR. Fuck you. I think everyone knows how shitty the relic system is. You either accept that or make some kind of a weak excuse for it. But the thing that really bothers me about this half-baked garbage is that it's an instance where Nightreign gets to have its cake and eat it too. I've already mentioned that I'll be treating this game as though it's the real FromSoft game that it's claiming to be, through its price tag and implied difficulty. And that means taking a realistic stance against the shockingly underdeveloped progression system in Nightreign without mod-tinted glasses. I think there's a strange psychological effect that this game has, where it's just shitty enough and its development was just rushed enough that your brain will auto-correct and assume that it's mod content whenever most convenient. When the dedicated progression mechanic proves to be something so offensively nebulous and poorly thought out, the natural conclusion is, it absolutely cannot be something that's shipped with a premium game. Your inclination will, of course, be to overlook it. Well, it's just mod content. The mod devs did their best considering they're amateurs not getting paid for their work. You know what? It's actually kind of nice, actually. A labor of love crafted by some well-intentioned fans. But it's not that. It is a premium product shipped by a AAA studio. These people were paid for their shoddy work. There were fucking shareholders who weighed in on the development and release of this game. And let's be honest, they probably wanted to ship it at $70 and had to be talked down to $40. Again, I'm not the one who forced this game to be a real game. I'm just the asshole who's telling you that it fucking sucks for what it is. There is no way in hell that you're satisfied with the relic system as it stands. Your brain is rationalizing the ineptitude of its design as a signal that the indie devs who made it will eventually expand upon it, you know, when this early access game gets its full release. But it's not an indie game, and it's already fully released. As it stands now, we have a system that is so wholly unregulated and reliant on RNG that the odds of receiving a god roll relic are so low that you'll likely be called a hacker if you were ever to roll one. I've literally never gotten a relic with more than 2 modifiers relevant to my build, and a third that's an unrelated passive buff. And I've spent millions upon millions of merc. There's a reason that up until Deep of Night's release, there was one single relic that every single player was encouraged to run, to an extent where I don't have to explain myself. If you've played Nightreign, you know exactly what I mean. A single, curated roll with 2 synergized perks and 1 unrelated was enough to be a guaranteed slot in every player's build, to a point where people were calling for it to be nerfed because it was stagnating the meta. That's just how bad the relic system is. A single, purchasable, curated stone was more valuable than anything you could possibly roll through chance. More often than not, you're only really rolling for a specific buff or equipment change necessary for the sake of your build. And then on top of that, hoping that the color of the stone you receive actually fits into a relevant chalice. Otherwise, it's fucking useless to you. There is a reason that so many people hack their relics, and it's not just because they want to win and have a wildly overpowered build. It's also because they're fixing the fucking game for the devs. They're implementing a mechanic missing from the current version of the game, which would allow you to modify even a single aspect of this half-assed progression, whether that be allowing you to eventually fully craft your own stones, modifying your chalices to have different colors, or to upgrade slots to the white omnicolor version, or even just to isolate the equipment changes or stat changes into a system of their own, freeing up the relics to be used for more direct buffs and modifications to skills or alts. For example, sure, you could, as it stands, take Duchess, and then give her hella HP buffs with dormant power to help her find great shields, alongside a strength increase at the cost of intelligence, mind, and dex, but your result would just be a ramshackle guardian with all of your relevant relic slots used up. These are multiple different systems running in tandem, crashing into each other and impeding their viability. There's no reason whatsoever that the weapon Ash of War or default spells shouldn't be their own item, outside of the relics slottable within your starting weapon. It is only through pure lack of effort that all of these mechanics have been pressed together through this meat grinder and slopped out within the relic system. Any of these basic-ass suggestions I've mentioned could have been introduced into the game at any point since Nightreign's release, in an effort to finish designing the lazily built relic system, which could have resulted in an intuitive progression system where players have a final goal to reach towards after hours and hours of gameplay. A final point of progression where you have obtained your version of a perfect build, adjustable at a whim whenever you're taking on a challenge of a different nature. And sure, it could have been hella expensive to reach that point, with a variety of resources necessary to make changes to your build. But that's just it. It could have been a real, tangible, rewarding progression system instead of this nebulous, meaningless garbage. Considerably fewer people would hack their relics if there was an intended path of progression leading them to the utmost of the endgame, and the game itself would find far greater sense of balance when played against that progression ceiling. To me, the entire system is a sick joke, a non-functional mess which players are forced to make the most of. And that would have been bad enough if it weren't for the insultingly ambiguous state of the identity of the relics entirely. What even are they? Why do they have random childlike colors and matching unnecessary adjectives unrelated to their abilities, like burning scene? Why do you slot them into a chalice while also slotting random necklaces, pocket watches, whetstones, and boss manhole covers into the same chalice? The answer is always the same in Nightreign. It is because they are a nothing burger in both function or progression and intangibility. They have no place in this world they've been designed into because they are nothing. They are a placeholder for something meaningful. A placeholder for a random Elden Ring PNG asset to be placed upon in the few instances of curated roles given as reward for remembrance quests. Outside of those few instances, the random rolled relics are just make-believe. Please pretend that they're more than nothing. And the fucking kick in the nuts of it all is to realize they could have just used the assets from Elden Ring's armor pieces. If this wasn't a character-based game, Just like I mentioned, it shouldn't have been. They could have just dropped armor pieces with relevant buffs attached to them instead of this ridiculously ill-defined system. And it would have been fucking easier to develop than the current system. Just copy and paste every armor piece into the random rolled rewards. You wouldn't need to use the stupid obtrusive chalice system, and instead could have easily just used the standard armor slots. The result would be a more immersive system that feels more tactile and has a visual impact on your character. Instead of scouring a sea of the same colored stone PNG trying to find the one that happens to have the character relevant buff you needed, you would be like, I had a really good pair of banished Nightgreaves around here, I think. And then you would find them within an armory wardrobe. You know, instead of a random table where you slot needlessly colorful relics with ill-defined skills into non-tangible chalices. Meaningless fluff meant to hide the fact that the devs didn't do their due diligence. They didn't make anything. And while we're at it, let's just mention how easy it would be to include a box tailoring mechanic from Elden Ring, modified to allow players to visually reskin their favorite armor piece relics into other pieces they've unlocked in one way or another. Perhaps also costing some kind of currency, which would give Nightreign another progression system, but this time an unimportant aesthetic one, allowing you to play dress up with your guy. Gamers love playing dress up with their characters. You know, anything more than just reskins of old Dark Souls characters. But I suppose that's asking too much from the $40 copy-paste mod slop game. One thing I've been kind of circling this whole time is how Nightreign doesn't seem to have any reward systems in place for long-term play. Despite eventually revealing itself to be a somewhat live service style game with continued support, balance changes, and an overall implication that it can be played indefinitely. And something I said a long time ago in reference to Lords of the Fallen was something along the lines of, if we let poor quality Souls games stand without criticism, they will eventually crumble into mass-produced garbage meant for a casual fan base. Which I punctuated by saying, someday, God forbid, we might see a Souls game with a battle pass. I hate to break this to you, but we are there already. The Battle Pass anecdote was meant to represent a symptom, not the disease itself. A symptom of a game with gameplay so meaningless and repetitive that a cookie-cutter reward system has to be arbitrarily included to retain the attention of a casual audience. Nightreign would be a better game if it were to have a Battle Pass. That's where we're at right now. Now let's come at this with some nuance here. I'm not saying that every single Battle Pass game is total shit. I play Fortnite. I think it's a pretty fun, low-investment way to stay connected with friends I might otherwise not hang out with if I only played Elden Ring and they didn't. I can remain fully invested in Elden Ring and still hop on Fort for a couple matches to blow off steam between challenge run attempts. But let's keep one thing completely clear here. There never could have been a Battle Pass in any FromSoft game until this point. FromSoft games have always had self-contained, meaningful gameplay without an external source necessary to keep playing. A Battle Pass would look freakish in Elden Ring. You would think you were having a stroke. But Nightreign? That's a completely different story. You can visualize it perfectly, can't you? A pass with different character skins from old games or new themed skins, Merc and Sovereign sigils dropped at various points, emotes as well as speech stones, and curated relics just powerful enough to encourage players to buy the new pass each season. It's not even remotely a stretch of the imagination, because deep down, on a fundamental level, Nightreign is a meaningless game. It was designed from the top down to be a meaningless game, because it wasn't designed to be anything more than the sum of its parts. And most of its parts weren't designed with it in mind. Again, it is a Frankenstein's monster of stolen assets and ideas that constantly contradict one another, resulting in a boring mess, a Souls roguelike. The variety of a roguelike being stunted by the rigidity of a Souls final boss, and the satisfaction of Souls gameplay being stunted by the random nature of a roguelike. A game with infinite potential, yet lacking the variety and range to ever take advantage of that potential. Nightreign truly is the Chris Pratt of the video games industry. Infinite potential, but only to provide the exact same experience over and over and over. Infinite potential for the same man to endlessly play the same character. Except, that is, within Chris Pratt's iconic role as Jim Preston within the hit 2016 movie Passengers. You remember that film? You know, the one that was highly underappreciated in its time because it mainly focused on a man making a decision that greatly affected a woman's life without her consent. And because it was released in 2016, a time when people were pretty concerned about the future of women's bodily autonomy. I once saw a review claiming that Passengers was the grab her by the pussy movie. And listen, I get it. It was a scary time to be a liberal. And you know what? In hindsight, they were right to be worried. They called it. Quite possibly the worst aspect of Trump's dogshit presidencies is having to admit that a liberal was ever right about anything. But that doesn't mean we should condemn any movie where a man makes a self-admitted mistake which ends up endangering a woman or limiting her agency. In fact, I think that very facet of the movie is what makes it pretty good. It's thought-provoking enough for us to question if the main character is ever actually redeemable after having made such a decision. To condemn another person to a lifetime of isolation with him. We could debate whether, spoilers, the happy ending is deserved or not, and if it's truly a happy ending at all, or just the case of long-term Stockholm Syndrome. We can discuss how the movie might have been better if he woke up a dude, and was only looking for companionship, lacking the implication of sex coming into play. And then, extrapolating on that, would the tables turn once more if a Brokeback Mountain situation comes to be? Also, if we take a moment to delve into the female lead's character instead of just taking her as a flat filler victim, there's a lot to understand about her that makes the movie compelling from both characters' perspectives. I obviously don't want to imply whatsoever that Aurora was asking for it, or to undermine the horrific nature of the crime committed against her. But if you were paying attention to her backstory, you would understand that her decision to take part in this one-way journey came with huge costs and huge risks. She was sacrificing her entire life on Earth to take part in the colonization of a distant world, including her friends, her affluence, her successful career as an author, all for the chance to be thrust into an adventure which was an inclination likely born from an internalized insecurity, if we're being honest. But the malfunction of a hibernation pod could have just as easily happened to her. Nobody thought it was possible until it happened. Another point I find extremely thought-provoking about Passengers that people seem to forget, probably because the main character was played by Chris Pratt, who's kinda hard not to see as a privileged, taking-it-easy type of dude, is that he was planning to kill himself moments before discovering Aurora's pod. There's a significant chunk of the movie dedicated to his descent into loneliness and despair. And you know, people seem to be really sensitive when it comes to topics of self-harm, but to me, due to the overall condemnation of Jim Preston's character from critics, I'm left to wonder, do people think he should have just done it? You know? Rather than spreading his misery to someone else without their consent? I'm not going to speculate one way or another because I don't want to come off as either pro-self-harm or anti-female autonomy, neither of which I am, but I think the complex combination of themes and difficult questions to answer that are asked by the hit film Passengers makes it undeniably pretty good. Again, I think the casting of Chris Pratt probably didn't do the movie any favors, but I would definitely argue that Jim Preston is the best character he's ever portrayed by a mile. Someone with compelling flaws, stuck in an impossible situation, who gets to be the hero at the end, making the sacrifices necessary to redeem himself. But is it too late to redeem him? And is it enough that he was willing to put Aurora back to sleep once he found the technology necessary to do so? Passengers, the best movie of 2016. I'm obviously joking, Passengers is fine. It's not a great film, but at bare minimum it has characters with flaws and depth, who attempt to overcome those flaws in an effort to grow and change. And that's more than you can say about any shitty Scorsese film. God, I fucking hate his movies. I swear that dude is such an industry plant hack. Oh, I can't wait for his next movie that's basically just a documentary about bad people doing bad things and indiscriminately either getting away with it or dying pointless deaths. The Mob exists. The movie. Scumbag financial dickheads exist. The movie. Domestic terrorist vigilantes exist. the movie. I think someone else wrote that one, to be honest, but still, that film fucking sucks. Imagine having a movie where the crazy guy goes on a rampage killing bad guys, only to mime shooting himself in the head with finger guns. And then the movie doesn't end. It turns out he's fine. He got away with killing a bunch of people. And the woman who rejected him after he took her to a porno theater on a first date wants him back, giving him the opportunity to throw it in her face. It's like, sorry, bitch, you should have just accepted my unwanted sexual advances while you had the chance. Was every fucking boomer like this? Were they all just incels who got laid because women were expected to just submit to sexual assault? Cringe, dogshit movie. Joker did it 1,000 times better with a more relatable and complex character, somehow despite being based on a comic book character. Now what about The Wolf of Wall Street? Vain wish fulfillment nonsense for people who think that being a weaselly finance dipshit makes you cool. This shit is literally the exact same thing as otakus watching harem isekais. It's a movie about a bland piece of shit who scams people and gets away with it. That's it. You know what? If you like this movie, let me just ask you, while being topical, if the main character was instead a Somali immigrant who games the system and gets away with it, would you still like it? You either would, which is fair. Honestly, it would be a better movie because at least the main character would be an underdog rising to the top and losing themselves to wealth, Scarface style. Or you wouldn't, because you can't place yourself into the shoes of that character because your only real interest in the film was based on vapid vanity. Scorsese doesn't make compelling films. He makes wish fulfillment, self-insert, fake tough guy slop. And the fact that he was willing to criticize Marvel movies for ruining cinema is so fucking tone-deaf. He's not wrong. Marvel movies are meaningless trash slopped into the mainstream trough, but he knows that from experience because he's been shitting out Marvel movies for decades now. They're just Marvel movies for divorced dads and low-functioning sociopaths. People whose idea of wish fulfillment is to not have to practice impulse control. But you know what? I probably just don't get it, right? I'm missing the point. The films are actually about how the shallow and vain lifestyles of rich criminals are actually unrewarding. Yeah, totally. I bet you apply that same amount of mental charity towards shit like Morbius too, right? You see, the plot holes are actually an augmented reality storytelling device showing us the crumbling mind of Dr. Michael Morbius as he loses himself to the vampire curse. Truly the greatest psychological thriller of our age. Bravo. Encore. I fucking hate this absolute cinema meme. The offshoot ones are cool and all, but seeing fartin' Scorsese next to the word cinema is a hilarious joke. Anyway, sorry, I got off track there. What was this video about again? Right, the award-deserving hit 2016 film Passengers, a film with actual depth, compelling themes, and realistic flawed characters. And I forget, maybe someone can remind me, what was the tipping point that made Jim Preston decide to wake up Aurora? You know, after he fell into an isolation-born depression, after he almost offed himself, after he stumbled upon Aurora's pod, read her information, became enamored by her, and finally, after he spent some time agonizing whether or not he should give in to temptation and wake this woman he's deluded himself into falling in love with. Oh, that's right. An overly agreeable robotic AI bartender misunderstands the situation and encourages him to live a little.
I know how to wake Aurora up.
Well, that seems like a fine idea. You could use some company.
Fucking Passengers predicted AI psychosis and the over-agreeability of ChatGPT 4 in fucking 2016. I take it back. Passengers isn't just good. It's a great movie. They should really remake it without Chris Pratt. Anyway, what I'm getting at is that every once in a while you will stumble onto a Jim Preston-esque run of Nightreign. Something surprisingly special despite originating from a bland cookie-cutter source. I've had insanely low odds clutches like the one I mentioned earlier in this video, and I've had absurdly powerful runs where the final boss is ripped to shreds in seconds. But to me, that in no way tips the scales against the amount of time I've invested in Nightreign. the special runs are few and far between. I've accounted for them when I claim that Nightreign is a boring, repetitive game undermined by an unthinkable amount of its own design decisions. Just because I like passengers doesn't mean I would ever claim that Chris Pratt is a great actor with range. Now, that's all the baseline information I need to cover before we can get into Nightreign's post-release content. And so, let's jump right in and begin talking about the enhanced bosses, which I'm happy to say, overall, was an ingenious idea. When the first enhanced boss Adele came out, I was very close to making a small appreciation analysis video for the very concept of enhancing the Night Lords. Starting the boss in Phase 2 was a nice touch, encouraging players to master the boss in its previous most deadly form, and the storm attack is a pretty awesome visual that uses established mechanics in a new and somewhat interesting way. Yeah, it's kind of a gimmick, and yeah, the changes weren't all that crazy between the standard version and the enhanced, but I'm sure when the next upgrade comes out, the final form of Adele will truly be a fully fledged boss fight, and not just a Night Lord mini-boss fight. The enhanced boss upgrade is unironically genius, considering the content model of Nightreign. You could not make the Night Lords any more complex than they were without reducing the time it took to play an expedition. However, by giving players time to learn a simple training wheels version of the boss through the main game's base content, well before introducing a more complex, more punishing, and overall more complete upgraded boss, they've reduced my argument against the simplicity of Night Lord's designs to nothing. The Night Lords can now be as complex as FromSoft wants them to be because they're given to us in manageable chunks. And the only possible way that the Nightreign devs could fuck up such an incredible clutch to what was an embarrassing level of incompetence in boss design would be if all of the rest of the bosses were enhanced with stupid gimmicks rather than more complex and engaging movesets. And if they only enhanced them once, right? Like how fucking stupid would it be to implement a system where the bosses are organized by difficulty through a color-coded system which mimics the color patterns of loot rarity, blue and purple, only to never come out with legendary versions of the fights? How stupid would the devs look if they only implemented one pass on almost each boss, upgrading them with nonsensical gimmicks, and then stopped there? I mean, they would look like total hacks who never had any interest in actually making well-designed fights. Anyway, let's continue looking at the enhanced bosses. Next we have Gnoster, one of the worst fights, which transitions from sloppy gank to embarrassing simplicity, and is upgraded to begin with embarrassing simplicity, starting the fight in its Phase 2 combined form, then transitions to even sloppier gank, introducing a third bug, moves with worse telegraphs with diarrhea damage, and a resurrection mechanic that never lets you avoid the gank for long. A bad fight made worse. Next, the Augur, which was an embarrassing gimmick fight, and is now upgraded to bizarrely start the fight in his raid form, lacking summons. The gimmick is removed, but there's not all that much left afterward. Killing this nerfed Augur spawns a dormant power, which gives you the fucking Storm Ruler. An inside joke from the Cool Kids table, now repeated by these fucking dorks. The Storm Ruler was always a gimmick. It was left in the dust a long time ago, last used against Yorm, the easiest of the Heirs of Fire. It was never meant to be the pinnacle of endgame content. It was never meant to be anything more than an obligatory reference. And now it's here in the fucking RNG loot game, at the point where it could be most contradictory to the RNG loot gameplay. Do skill attack power buffs affect your damage? I don't know, they didn't in the Rykard fight. In fact, most buffs didn't apply to the Serpent Hunter Spear. Do any increases in damage affect this Storm Ruler? Is there any intention behind any design decision in this game? The fact is, this fight is the longest middle finger possible towards the roguelike elements of this shit game. If you wanted to design a static encounter, just fucking let me skip the Night Cycle busy work. and fight your shitty reference-stealing boss. You know, I think the Nightreign devs were attempting to assert themselves as part of the team with this fight. See, we know the references to the old games too were FromSoft guys. But the reality is, they've totally shown their fucking asses with this fight. The biggest compliment I've always made towards FromSoft over the years was their ability to consistently enhance and evolve their formula. I've said it many times. DS1 was a good starting point. DS2 added adventure and build crafting, DS3 brought good boss design and hitboxes, and Sekiro added crouching stealth and jump attacks. Elden Ring was a game that really brought it all together into a masterpiece that combined the best elements of all previous work. The facets of design that Elden Ring was able to upgrade were more peripheral, like the open world, but that doesn't mean there weren't many smaller morsels of design that were upgraded from their previous work. The Rykard fight is easily the best version of a Storm Ruler fight that FromSoft has ever created. I'm still not a huge fan of the formula forcing players to use a specific weapon to defeat a boss, but Rykard is streets ahead of his predecessors. Having access to the weapon's entire moveset within the Rykard fight is undeniably a more creative and interesting way to design a boss like this. And for Nightreign to ignore that reality and instead use the obviously less interesting Storm Ruler is absolutely baffling. It is the equivalent of when British woman Captain America says the line, "I can do this all day." That's not yours. It doesn't mean anything here. A reference doesn't equate to quality, especially when the usage is nonsensical and idiotic. FromSoft is supposed to move forward, not back. And if this game was made by the real FromSoft team, they would have known that. I mean, Patches is in every game too, but that doesn't mean he would be included at the cost of boss design and combat gameplay. That would be stupid. This fight sucks, and it has like 4 total attacks that all blow, including a diarrhea beam. In what way is this boss enhanced? Next we have Fulgor, a boss that is made easier in his enhanced form. He starts in Phase 2 unchanged from his original Phase 2 form with his corrupted arm, but then cuts it off at half health, revealing a fully healed arm underneath. Just kind of weird, I guess, but I suppose it's lucky for him. He needed both arms to wield his bow and twin blade attacks, which make up his new moveset. Fulgor's enhanced form isn't really as much enhanced as it is an alternative version of his Phase 2. He doesn't get any more complex, and on top of that, he loses his ultimate move that needed to be countered with lightning damage. In exchange for a single explosive ultimate, which is really easy to dodge by its sound cue despite having a shitty visual telegraph. I guess this is an enhancement to the fight in total because you have to learn 2 different movesets. But really it's just 2 simple boss fights back to back. And the second stage, in my opinion, is way fucking easier. It's just strange. Next there's Libra, another gimmick that should have been left in the past. He summons NPCs to fight. And that's the gimmick. It's the old monk from Demon Souls, the Looking Glass Knight from DS2, or Half-Life from DS3. A poorly coded NPC enemy equipped with loot from a player's successful run, I believe, making the balance completely fucked. All while the boss plays Simon Says with rules that you'll have to Google later if you want to succeed in this god-awful boring fight. I once saw a review of this boss created by one of those brown-nosing, never going to say a single bad word about FromSoft because their content is my meal ticket creators, who said that this boss was completely unbalanced, unfair, and they absolutely loved it. Yeah, of course you do. You're not even going to attempt to hide the fact that you have absolutely no integrity or credibility, are you? Words just don't mean anything, do they? You know what the best Souls game is? That Golem game from a while back. What, you couldn't beat it because it was unfair and unbalanced and generally poorly made? Sounds like you're just complaining about the game being too hard. And I'm totally not getting indirectly paid for saying this. Can't say anything that might upset my huge Golem audience. Anyway, fuck this absolute joke of design pretending to be a boss fight. And fuck me, I guess, for ever thinking that a decent Souls boss would have a moveset instead of moronic gimmicks. Next we have Caligo, a shit boss with more AoEs slapped onto each of his existing slop moves and ambient frostbite buildup if you fail to stagger him out of a specific move. Gotta love unavoidable damage, Stupid fight, stupid everything, who fucking cares anymore? The last boss that was enhanced was Gladius, the simplest of the original and therefore the Night Lord with the most to gain from an enhanced moveset. His moves got a massive increase to their damage, a poorly telegraphed ambient source of fire following the trail of most of his sword attacks, and 2 ultimate moves. One sweeping across the field before unleashing a reused attack from the night aspect, diarrhea included obviously, and another poorly telegraphed scripted move as the boss separates into 3 once more to finish the fight. This fight does all of one thing right, and that's to encourage you to get close to avoid the secondary ambient source of fire damage on Gladius's melees. However, that is so horribly telegraphed to you, you're just as likely to read it in the opposite direction as a flurry move meant to be spaced. Incompetence across the board. That is the legacy of the enhanced bosses. The one feature that could have elevated Nightreign to be something more than a casual game with simplistic bosses and infinite meaningless gameplay. And it was fumbled time and time again in favor of fucking gimmicks and moronic decisions, dragging the Souls formula back to a time of mediocrity, shitty telegraphs, and embarrassing design choices that had long since been left behind us. Difficulty demands quality, but the Nightreign devs would rather their bosses have higher numbers in health and damage, rather have gimmicks, would rather have shitty PNG poorly telegraphed moves and ambient damage than even the most basic increases to boss moveset and complexity. What a waste of what should have easily been the moment I was absolutely wrong about this game. I'm so fucking glad I didn't make that enhanced boss appreciation video after Adele, and instead waited until more were released before speaking my mind. What a fucking asshole I would have looked like if I had praised the concept, only to be met with 3 bugs, gimmick fish, Folgore finds Christ, stop hitting yourself, how not to design your dragon, and the flaming blender dimension. And that's it. That's as far as the Nightreign devs were able to take boss design. There is no legendary versions of these fights or even an enhanced version of the night aspect, and I for one am glad of that. Just imagine how bad a 3rd tier of these bosses would be, with as little as there is left to steal from old Souls games. What are they gonna do? Stick the fish into the ground and make the arena fall apart like a bed of chaos? What about a gank fight made up of a ton of enemies which culminates in one stronger version of that enemy, like Royal Rat Vanguard or Deacons of the Deep? Right. Now I'm going to take a step away from the chronological release of Nightreign's content, skip the Deep of Night for now, and instead move on to covering the DLC for one main reason. I didn't play much of Deep of Night before the DLC's release. I only played through Deep Level 2 before giving up on the concept because it took like 10 hours of gameplay to reach that point, and I hadn't even seen an enhanced boss. I stopped playing and gave up on the idea of reviewing the content. It wasn't worth my time. Well, that was until the DLC was released, and I found myself with a renewed sense of responsibility to expose this game for what it is. My true experience playing Deep of Night and making it to Deep Rank 5 included the DLC content, and so I figure it will be most relevant to cover the DLC first. Now, one thing I'll say up front is that I certainly grade on a curve when it comes to DLCs, specifically Souls game DLCs. The way I see it, a DLC is really a litmus test for the passion developers feel for a project, whether they're aware of it or not. At the point where a DLC is being created, the base game should be a finished product. Maybe not shipped yet or still going through some wrap-up testing and tweaks, but largely complete for the most part. The assets have been created, the physics engine, the combat systems, the weapons sandbox, new mechanics and ideas have all been brought to life. A world has been created of their own design. And if that world had been designed with any sense of communal creative intent, then one would assume that their finished piece of art would be something special to them. something they would want to bolster with expansions that highlight the utmost vision they had for the project. The hardest work is done, and all that's left is to create an experience that stands above as the pinnacle of what your game was intended to make players feel. For Elden Ring, I expected a DLC with fast-paced, heart-pounding bosses that take full advantage of the combat sandbox in well-intentioned ways, alongside a meaningful world to explore which would bolster and synergize with the base game's content. Instead, we got mostly bosses with ill-intentioned difficulty, ultimately resulting in the final boss being undeniably broken on release, and a massive empty world, independent to the base game with nothing meaningful to discover by exploring it. I also expected the Lies of P DLC to be the best that Lies of P could offer, with a focus on difficult, well-designed, deflection-centered gameplay. And instead we got generic Souls-like slop bosses without fury moves, without meaningful breakable weapons, with a thin veneer of unbalanced artificial difficulty smeared on top, which from my experience worked as a highly effective smokescreen to ward off any criticism. What I'm trying to say is, the DLC should really be the best content the game has to offer. And that's not even a controversial opinion to have, it's just pure common sense. From a practical real-life standpoint, the DLC should be the least time-intensive content to develop, leveraging past efforts which should absolutely leave passion and creativity to be the foremost driving factor behind the content's development. I believe that on a logical, fundamental level. If a DLC sucks, it's just because it was being made as an obligatory product rather than a work of art. The last flourish you'll paint across your masterpiece. After doing all of the grunt work, gathering materials and pigments, building a suitable canvas, finding your focal point and framing it within all the little details in the background. A product DLC is much more like stapling a piece of drawing paper to the bottom of a canvas with $15 obscuring the content beneath. I refuse to lower my standards when it comes to DLCs, and I think you would be a fool if you weren't to do the same. But all of this just brings me back to Nightreign. What could we possibly come to expect from Nightreign's DLC? There really is no grand vision of design behind this project, in my opinion. I really think that it was just an easy way to slap together assets in the general shape of a roguelike without much thought put into what that would actually look like. And so I don't think there's any possible way to visualize what Nightreign would look like in its pinnacle form, without a complete and total overhaul. I don't think Nightreign is competent enough to even begin thinking about creating a DLC for it. But was I wrong? Did they come out with the utmost of Nightreign gameplay, the highlight of the whole game? No, of course not. You just got more Nightreign. More stolen assets jammed into the same miserable mess of uninspired contradictive design. So let's go over what we got for $15. We got 2 new characters, which again are probably the most polished and well-intentioned element of Nightreign's design, even if they go against the grain of Nightreign's most fundamental identity as a roguelike type game, but whatever. Once again, they're pretty cool, and if you main either one of them, you probably think the DLC was worth it for their inclusion alone. The rest of the DLC centers around a new map. Well, a shifting Earth event, which serves as the new map, one with smaller size and more focus on vertical design. And it is wildly disappointing that this map fails in the exact same ways that a shifting Earth does. The gameplay on the Forsaken Hollows map is much more restrictive than the standard Limvale map, with less total compound spots, only 3 spawn areas, 2 of which that are very close to one another, and a very important power objective, which you'll passively chase within Night 1, so that early into Night 2 you can claim said power, which subverts a 50% reduction to your health within 2 castle areas located on opposite sides of the map. The rigid expected formula of this map becomes very clear very early. Get the power and basic equipment on Night 1, then spend Night 2 Part 1 in one castle or the other, beating formidable opponents until the game flips a coin. Either you chose correctly and the storm circle is on your side of the map, or you didn't, and you teleport to the other side of the map. to begin clearing the other castle. What a silly illusion of choice way to attempt to avoid the stagnant gameplay problem that arises within Shifting Earth gameplay. In an effort to avoid the one single area that will definitely be the first circle location, they've given us two locations, at the very top and bottom of the map. The areas which will be most quickly swallowed by the storm. The gameplay that results is, you will pick a castle, and if you're wrong, you will switch castles. That is it. Nothing else changes. The Shifting Earth is still static, boring, nothing burger gameplay. And the final circle containing the Night 2 boss will always spawn on the right side of the map at basically an equidistance area from either castle. And separating the map's main mechanic from the final boss area means that you will basically have to drop whatever you're doing the moment the circle begins to close. You likely won't have time to finish whatever boss you're fighting because you will have a long way to walk, which is unfortunate, especially so if that takes place while you're completing the Divine Tower area, which is one of my favorite aspects of the DLC. This tower has 3 floors with bosses, the first containing a Night 1 final boss, and the second 2 pitting you against a Night 2 final boss. This gameplay is some of my favorite because it shaves away a lot of the Nightreign fluff that gets in the way of something closer to a simple boss rush. There's no optimal route, no turning back halfway to find sites of grace, no teammates getting lost and splitting up between potential objectives. You just clear 3 bosses, get your loot, get the reward at the top, and move on with your run. It's pretty close to what I said much earlier, wishing that the game skipped out on all the timed night cycle nonsense, and instead was 2 end night bosses and a Night Lord. When all is said and done, I really wish, above all else, that the Nightreign idea was scrapped, and instead a free bit of mod content was released for Elden Ring called something like the Infinite Divine Tower. You could keep all of the Nightreign stuff that works, like... Fuck it. Scrap it all and make it a boss rush. That's my prescription. The Circle Storm is a cancer on Souls gameplay. It is absolutely miserable. Now, within this new map, there are 2 Night Lords, each with 2 potential sets of Night 1 and 2 bosses. And I have to say, these are some of the worst and best encounters that Souls has to offer. On one hand, we have the dogshit fights like Shadow's Divine Warrior and Curseblade combined, or 3 Death Knights, Red Bear or Divine Beast Dancing Lion. Yeah, all those dogshit garbage mini-boss fights from Shadow of the Erdtree made it, but you know. One thing I've given Nightreign credit for a while now is that they stuck to the less shitty version of the Golden Hippo in the base game content. The one lacking the poorly designed quill moves, and you already fucking know where I'm going with this, so I'll spare you the setup. They added the full Golden Hippo fight into the Northern Castle. Yippee! Didn't get enough of Shadow's dogshit design in the few times I played it. Love to see it again. There's also a pretty mid reintroduction of Artorias from DS1, which I talked about a long time ago and mentioned he's misremembered as being a decent fight in DS1, but really his fight is super restrictive and boring. I get that he's cool and all, we see the fit bro and it's fire, but still, he was not a great boss in DS1. Why would he be any better here? They really should have used Manus. Manus actually slaps even from today's standards. Anyway, the addition of Artorias to Nightreign would only really highlight just how simplistic his fight really is, especially so when played against 3-player hack-and-slash tactics, which is why he needed to be reworked in a way that would make him a threat to 3 players at once. And that was accomplished through a couple of notable changes, most notably through a flop around like an asshole combo. And you know, I've been using that phrase a lot, so I wanted to quickly reinforce its meaning and express just how thoughtless this implementation of game design is, due to the lack of value it provides the player experience. You see, a combo move can be a lot of things, starting with its basic ability to make the boss feel very threatening in an intense moment where they apply a ton of pressure onto the player. At bare minimum, a combo move will basically always accomplish that. But taking it a step further, a combo should also be designed with the player in mind. It should be more than just just essentially a cutscene where the boss farms aura, and should offer engagement across the whole of the combo. Every individual move the boss makes within the combo should be a moment where the player gets to decide exactly how they'll best approach the incoming attack, either by dodging, spacing, positioning, jumping, low profiling, blocking, or parrying. And each decision should be ideally made in an effort to make the absolute most efficient use of your stamina and most efficient use of the downtime between attacks to apply damage of your own within the combo. This is what makes the combat experience engaging, knowing that you can get one extra attack in if you face down the boss's entire combo attack with careful timing or good positioning, or whatever else is at your disposal. Another potential layer of boss design that can bolster this whole system is if the boss can switch up their combos in small ways, reacting to player positioning, which again will allow for player engagement to take center stage, giving you options to bait out attacks with larger openings or avoid more difficult reactions from the boss. This is all pretty high-level boss design, which FromSoft has mastered over the years, and I wouldn't fault you for not realizing the complexity of their combat systems. However, if we bring our attention back to Nightreign, that level of technical mastery is nowhere to be seen, and has been replaced by the aforementioned flop around like an asshole style of combo. These moves offer no sort of engagement whatsoever to the player. The boss's movements are made to be intentionally hard to follow and predict, leaving no room for the player to attempt to deal damage in between the individual attacks. The combos are static, never changing or reacting to player positioning, essentially playing out like one large block of damage, resulting in gameplay where your only goal is to avoid the incoming damage, which you can almost always do by simply burst sprinting away for the duration of the combo. That's the answer for almost every single combo attack unique to Nightreign. Identify the move, sprint away from it, and then identify the final attack of the move, at which point you're safe to re-engage. It's really a pathetically simple pattern that spans the majority of melee-based bosses, including the rework of Artorias, who also gets a large explosive attack that halts the combat entirely until he finishes dumping out a bunch of humanity-sprayed projectiles. Very simplistic boss design across the board, which only serves to provide a thinly veiled attempt to make the boss appear menacing. However, on the other hand, there are some significantly better fights within the End Night showdowns, those being taken from Elden Ring's base game and DS3. And they are the Demon Princes from DS3 and Mohg. Although it seems like Nightreign players hate the Mohg fight, and that's understandable. He's a fully fledged modern boss fight, and these are players who are scared of BBH. Come on now, you can't throw a full boss fight at Nightreign players. That's just cruel. I kid. But I do think it kind of sucks that they kept his blood curse mechanic, which requires a specific item to avoid. I've never gotten it because I'm pretty good at the Mohg fight and I just heal through the damage, but I understand why people think it's unfair, because it is. It's stupid. It should be a guaranteed drop from the Night 1 boss, or something that's more intuitive than buying from some vendor somewhere on the map. Now lastly for the DLC, let's talk about the Night Lords, starting with the Balancers. An obnoxious gank fight with a near constant source of damage waiting just outside your view to hit you with some bullshit. A return of patience to the Souls formula, but within an annoying gank fight that stays well past its welcome. And of course, what would it be without its diarrhea streak moves? This time, literally having the bosses streak across the map, spraying their feces as they go. The dumbest looking move I may have ever seen. You know, I really like making critique videos. I like challenging people's opinions and seeing if my own opinions hold up to scrutiny, while throwing in silly anecdotes like the passengers thing, and attempting to develop a sense of catharsis at the end of it all. But when attempting to analyze something like the Balancers, this starts to feel a lot more like work, like an obligation rather than something I'm passionate about. And that's because I'm basically forced to painstakingly explain to you exactly what's obviously right in front of your eyes. And I don't think that most people here are stupid. I'm sure the average Souls fan looks at a single asset copy-pasted 9 or whatever times and realizes that it's just a shitty, lazily designed boss fight. A single balancer isn't fun to fight, which we can experience whenever the balancer raid shows up and the boss she spawns next to gets distracted. So why the fuck would a heap of them be any more fun? They're just fucking annoying, and the buffed one in Phase 2 is barely any better, yet also hampered by a barrage of attacks outside of your view, signaled by either a line of spears or the grab attack audio cue. It really is just Deacons of the Deep, except with less total enemies who are admittedly better designed and more dangerous, yet have to be reined in through an arbitrary aggro system. Like, why wouldn't these assholes just jump you and finish the job? Aren't they supposed to want you dead? And that's the silliest part of this all. If you know your fight wouldn't work if all the gank enemies were to have realistic aggression levels, then maybe you shouldn't make a gank fight. Just make something else. It's the equal opposite reason that the Godskin duo fight sucks, and why everyone just uses sleep pots on them. When attacking together, there is no rhythm to the fight, so you just end up running away from them for stupid amounts of time before landing single hits and beginning the cycle anew. But if they were to only attack one at a time, there's no point in it being a gank fight. There should be intuitive reasons that the bosses don't attack all at once, which you cannot realistically do when your entire boss fight is just 9 identical assholes. And that brings me to the enhanced version of the Balancer's fight, which has an even more simplistic and unrealistic boss targeting system. This fight is either the most impossible and absurd fight you've ever seen, or you know how it works and it's stupid easy to a point where it feels like you're cheesing, but you're not. The boss is just simplistic to a point where basic strategy feels like you're exploiting it. You see, each player will only have one berserked balancer targeting them at any given time. They begin to frenzy one at a time until 3 are active and attacking each player. If the player were to fight them without realizing this, it would be easy to get quickly overwhelmed by the balancers resurrecting or the non-frenzied other balancers being close enough to aggro. But with even the slightest bit of awareness of mechanics and control over the battlefield, you can divide and conquer each of the balancers with ease. They fall like paper after they throw a single dedicated thrusting attack that they will always use after berserking and charging the player, which can be dodged by strafing. This is the main damage cycle of the fight, and it is as equally brain-dead as the overall design of the fight was. A paper-thin gimmick with a paper-thin answer. But of course, there's also the pointless, time-wasting phase where the balancers combine into a slug and fuck around for like 3 minutes while you run away and jump over embarrassingly lazily designed damage objects. I really cannot call them anything else than that. The most basic of creative design was not even attempted in an effort to explain these damage points in a realistic way. Originating from the boss diving into the ground, several circles of damage just travel across the arena. In the same trust us bro mindset that the diarrhea attacks were created through, these attacks damage you from some unimmersive, inexplicable source. And again, I feel like I'm going insane here. For most of you, you just have to use your eyes and see how dogshit and stupid looking these attacks are. But for some reason, nobody who plays Nightreign is willing to criticize the unmatched amateur level of design we see here. I've literally seen TikTok edits of this fight as though it's supposed to look tough or some shit. It is spectacle nonsense which can't even hold the spectacle together long enough to have realistic looking slam dive attacks. These circles look so fucking stupid. And if that wasn't bad enough, the functionality of the fight as a fight, gameplay-wise, is garbage as well. You run around like an asshole for this entire reoccurring section of the fight. All you can do is jump over the cartoonish damage sources, mind-numbingly waiting for you to actually get a chance to fight back. I've always been a huge proponent of jumpable boss attacks. They are an incredible addition to the combat sandbox of Souls, but they are nothing if not properly implemented. They have to be an extra layer of skill set that the player has to master. They are a separate action taken besides just defaulting to dodge to avoid every attack, and require mastering that extra action taken within an intense, heated battle, where a single miss input could end the fight. Jump attacking the boss after avoiding their attack with a jump is the reward for mastering a higher level of combat than just dodge rolling. The entire system has to be implemented and working properly for there to be any combat cohesion. The balancers just having jumpable moves gives no benefit other than avoiding the move. It's missing the point of the Elden Ring combat sandbox. It's just as incompetent as every single shitty Souls-like that has a deflection mechanic that doesn't do anything with it. If it's just an alternative to dodging, then there's no reason to include it, and it's more likely just a convenient excuse to not design boss attacks with well-intentioned answers. We gave you the tools, you figure it out. Just like Discount Radahn's busted move. Difficulty demands quality, not laziness and a failure to understand even the most basic fundamental mechanics of Souls combat. This got away from me a bit, but what I'm getting at is enhanced balancers is garbage, with just enough going on and just enough danger to fool misinformed players into thinking it's difficult. It's not. It's just poorly designed. Next, there's the Dreglord, probably the second best Nightlord fight, but as always, very simplistic. Your goal is to be aggressive enough to consistently stagger him, preventing him from buffing his flurry combo with diarrhea secondary attacks in a big sloppy mess of damage. Once again, just like the Knight aspect and Fulgor to an extent, this is a boss that would seem like it would work well within a one-on-one battle. He's mostly melee based, with some meatball exceptions that mix up the combat and keep things interesting. However, again, just like the other two, instead of a focused intentional duel, the boss has to be dangerous towards 3 people at once. And so, once again, we see the flop around like an asshole style of combo take center stage for the majority of his moves. I don't personally find these moves to be all that engaging at all, and mostly combat them through good positioning while he's flailing, only to really time his more targeted moments. And so, let's finally go over his intentionally tricky ball moves. Dreglord has 3 combos, which will end with a jumping ball dunk slam attack that explodes, dealing huge damage across a wide area, acting as a major punishment for players who fail to identify and understand the subtle differences between these moves. 2 of these combos result in an intuitive, well-telegraphed slam with a nice, juicy opening afterwards to reward those who face down the move. This gives you time to damage the boss while rot columns safely explode around you. Overall, a well-designed and interesting move with thoughtful risk-reward design that wouldn't go unappreciated if it wasn't for the remaining ball slam move, which, to me, sours the whole batch. The last ball slam move happens after the Dreglord jumps onto a column, but uniquely doesn't go for his diving sweeps across the arena. Instead, he jumps directly into the air, performing a slightly delayed, slightly more glowing ball slam move that is otherwise visually identical to his previous slams. This attack will be performed, slammed into the ground, yet the resulting explosion will not be unleashed according to the visual information right before your eyes. Instead, the damage from the attack is bizarrely and unintuitively delayed by a half a second for absolutely no logical reason whatsoever, followed by a second instance of the attack with the same strange timing, somehow despite lacking the boss's larger windup. This attack leverages your previously understood information of how the boss attacks for huge cheap damage on the player within an unearned roll catch. And it's not like we haven't seen feint attacks that work well 1,000 times before within boss fights that front load their movement, then delay for a moment, before fully attacking with a swing of their weapon or body. But in those instances, it's a clearly visualized telegraphed moment where the boss design has baited you into the incorrect action. It's not a complete visual misdirect that ignores all physics and previously established rules, only to hit the player with a magical source of instant punishment. Difficulty demands quality, not visual information that directly lies to the player for cheap damage. I've never seen anyone point out the laziness of this boss's moveset, and so I would really like to know, what do you think of this move? Do you think that this is an appropriately designed challenge to place at the climax of a Nightreign run? Because the way I see it, this attack is incredibly lazy and insulting, despite being very easy to avoid once the gimmick is revealed. But that's just it. Dreglord is another Night Lord we can toss into the pile of gimmick-based challenges presented to Nightreign players, which pretend to have real difficulty. And in my opinion, Dreg is one of the greatest disappointments within the Night Lords because he was really close to a decent boss fight, until the Nightreign devs ran out of gas and forced an artificial source of difficulty into his moveset, resulting in a boss fight where the main pass-or-fail factor in the fight is whether or not you can remember how to identify which of his ball slam moves is going to cheat you visually. A considerable amount of boss moves throughout this game lack the punchiness that you would feel from them if the boss itself was an enemy attempting to hit you. But often it's a lot more like the boss is irrelevant, and the move itself is an independent entity with metaphysical properties dealing damage to you in silly ways. The boss isn't hitting you, the developers are. Just think about it for a moment. Diarrhea attacks explode on their own, and sometimes appear on their own. Noster's laser just appears from the sky. Augur's wave attacks either bounce around on their own or slowly move across the arena. The Fell Omen's Blood Slice teleports directly onto whichever player he's targeting. Libra's Frenzy turrets spin on their own, and his explosive sigils spawn on all three of you. There's random ambient damage within Adele's random lightning strikes, the Night Aspect's arena explosions, and Fulgor's Blade Slam ult. The Balancers set up radiating explosive circles and the dive damage circles that spawn on their worm mode. And the Dreglord has all kinds of ambiguous bullshit explosives in the aftermath of his moves. Across the board, there is a distinct separation between boss attacks and random sources of damage that spawn because of those attacks, and then act independently. And if you're being hyper-charitable towards Nightreign, you might say that the extra sloppy damage is necessary to create dangerous situations for 3 players at once. Or that there are Elden Ring bosses like Red Wolf, which also set up independent damage sources. But I'm done being charitable towards FromSoft. And Red Wolf is Elden Ring's exception that proves the rule. People fucking hate Red Wolf. The bottom line is, the boss design in Nightreign fucking sucks across the board. It is utter slop, and there is no other way to describe it. This cannot be the standard from now on. Discount Radahn with his stupid fucking holy projectiles on each of his attacks was bad enough. I need you to hold these people to a higher standard than this. If this is their best attempt, they need to go back to modding for free. This is not the mark of a premium product, and FromSoft needs to do better than this. And that's not asking a lot, when we've seen what they're capable of. Let me just ask you, as a thought exercise, what is your favorite boss in the history of Souls? Picture them, their aura, their lethality, their complex combinations of attacks and mechanics. Compared to that one fight, does anything in Nightreign even hold a candle to your favorite boss? I think not. Anyway, let's continue to the final piece of the puzzle left to cover, the Deep of Night mode. When Deep of Night was first released on September 11th... Wait, really? Well, the second worst thing to happen on September 11th then. When Deep of Night was released, I think it was a critical time for Nightreign, just after the enhanced bosses flopped onto the scene, where most people needed something more to keep them playing. A substantial reason to continue grinding this time-intensive mess of a game. And I think the release of the Deep was a huge nothing burger in regards to that for a majority of people. The first dozen or so hours of Deep of Night are really nothing more than the base game with small increases to difficulty and awkward mechanical changes. And from what I can tell based on Steam player counts, most people used that moment as an off-ramp from Nightreign entirely, up until the DLC. In my eyes, even with the introduction of the enhanced bosses, this game was still intended for a more casual fan base with its co-op focus. And I believe that most people weren't looking for the difficulty of their casual game to be cranked up as much as possible, while also requiring you to absolutely no-life it if you wanted to reach that higher level of difficulty. Many of the most dedicated FromSoft fanboys I know have not logged into Nightreign since shortly after the Deep of Night's release, and I absolutely understand why, because I was one of those those people. Early game Deep of Night didn't feel like it was a new experience with new content. It felt a lot more like a game that was malfunctioning and you're supposed to be testing for bugs, and logging that information for later if you want it to be successful. There are so many pitfall mechanics that can absolutely screw you over, like the new relic stones, which could potentially feature negative effects which could tank your run entirely, especially when you're just attempting to test them out to see how bad the negative effects could be. A Deathblight buildup on damage modifier is utterly garbage, for example. The same for a continuous HP drain effect, which will not only permanently hinder your survivability, but also cut out any potential benefit you might get from being full HP, such as attack increases or damage negation effects. Even later still, you might realize that an HP drain effect and continuous HP regeneration effect bafflingly don't cancel each other out. Instead, they ping-pong you back and forth between full HP and not, effectively reducing the value of full HP buffs in half. All of these strange interactions between buffs, debuffs, and mechanics made the entire experience feel like a chore of meaningless information to keep straight. And all for what? Just to play the same bosses you already have, the same shifting Earth maps, the same raid events, all just so you can potentially reach deep rank 59999? And what? Are we supposed to be impressed? Are you supposed to feel accomplished? It's an RNG game. What's the fucking point of releasing a ranked mode into what is supposed to be a casual, fun RNG game? I quickly realized that reaching deep level 5 was not within my level of investment for this game, and therefore I didn't feel like I could accurately comment on it within an analysis video I was at the time planning to make. This is another one of those moments where Nightreign gets to shield itself from criticism. What, you didn't grind the game for 60 hours to find out what rank 4 matches are like? Your opinion doesn't matter then. And I'm no stranger to these kinds of gatekeeping mentalities for games. People felt the same way about Millennia and Discount Radon, where they could hide the content from criticism by claiming that you're only complaining because you couldn't beat them. However, I was always before able to simply no-hit those bosses, obtaining a level of mastery over them that the average person wouldn't have, and then still complain about them, with more authority than the average player. And I largely did that in defense of more casual players, acting as a voice for those who have legitimate gripes about specific boss designs and couldn't no-hit the boss, and therefore felt like their opinions didn't matter. Nightrein's Deep of Deep mode, on the other hand, doesn't have the same bar of skill to reach for. Instead, it requires a fucking assload of time investment. Only an absolute no-life chud that's thrown away any chance of a sex life for the sake of this game gets to have an accurate opinion of it. I fucking hate that concept. I think Nightreign is a dogshit game that doesn't deserve that kind of special treatment immunity from criticism. And so, I became that no-life, no-sex-having chud. I played the absolute fuck out of Deep of Night. I beat Deep Rank 5. My opinion is well-founded, so let's get to it. Deep of Night isn't a test of skill. That's about it, really. It kind of sums up everything I have to say about it. I mean, it is an RNG game after all, but I suppose I should extrapolate a bit. This video isn't quite long enough yet. Let's start with the most frontward-facing reason Deep fails to be an appropriate challenge: the RNG. Obviously, a good run with RNG isn't going to be an accurate testing of your skills. In fact, I would argue that a rank 3 match with dogshit RNG is considerably harder than a lucky rank 5 match. I mean, you could easily just stumble your way into a perfect level 15 holy build on Gladius, and then not get its enhanced version, and if you fail on that on rank 5, you probably should be dropped down to rank 2, let's be honest. The next important facet of failure on Deepity Deep's part is the fact that individual player skill is largely not a focus of this game's design. A wildly more important factor in the individual player's success clearly comes down to a general sense of knowledge of many things. Firstly, the current state of the game. Have you read all of the patch notes? Is your information about how buffs work, which ones stack and which ones undermine you when stacked, up to date? Are your relics still relevant? Still running the glass necklace? Well, I hope not. It's working as intended now and not worth filling a relic slot with anymore. What about player abilities? Did you know the Executor got buffed, and now his cursed sword is considered melee damage? buffable with passives, and his Cursed Sword charged skill is now properly flagged as a skill, benefiting from passive skill increases. Did you know the Iron Eye's ranged bow damage got nerfed, and now you'll need to be much closer to deal effective damage or get revives? At the end of the day, the more important question to ask your teammates isn't, are you good at Souls games? It's, did you do your homework? Have you done the necessary external research to understand the many pitfalls of this shoddy-ass game? If you're a Nightreign player who's stuck at rank 4, I can almost guarantee you that it's not a lack of player skill that's holding you back. It's a lack of boring-ass busy work you'll have to do to consistently understand all of the poorly designed minutiae surrounding this game. You fundamentally cannot meet your highest potential as a Nightreign player by only playing the game. But none of this would even fucking be necessary if not for the inclusion of a dim-witted ranked mode being placed inside of a fucking RNG game. Nobody should care enough about this game to have obtained the core knowledge you need to be a rank 5 player. But that's just the thing. It's another reason why this game isn't a test of your skill. Reaching rank 5 with random teammates is incredibly difficult, considering you'll be constantly matching with rank 4 players. Even if you've no-lifed this game and completed all the required reading, you're likely going to have to carry your less informed teammates if you want to rise in the ranks. However, the second you reach rank 5, you begin matching with other rank 5 players. Other fucking idiots who also know way too much about Nightreign. There is very little reason from that point forward for you to lose a match, and Nightreign kind of knows this. Winning a basic rank 5 match without modifiers gives you like 200 points, but losing one can drop you like 700. You're expected to consistently win to even maintain rank 5. Which you'll likely do, now that you have well-informed teammates. And I must say, the game gets so fucking boring at that point. The only thing that could possibly make Nightreign a more stale, stagnant, mind-numbing experience is to consistently win. To consistently have decent teammates who don't need to be carried, who won't be thankful for a win, because it is as meaningless to them as it has become to you. You know, maybe this is just me, maybe this is anecdotal, and some people just like winning, even when it's in the most boring game ever created. But for me, the most fun I've had throughout my entire experience playing Deep of Night was very early on, at a point where I was one game away from my rank 5. From accomplishing my goal and, honestly, not really deserving it in hindsight. I had been getting extremely lucky and had not yet done my stupid homework necessary to fully understand the game mode. I lost that match, which would have put me out of my misery so much earlier, and I got tilted. I lost matches until I was back into rank 3. And that experience of being expeditiously thrust into low ranking once more was more fun than every single rank 5 match I've ever played combined. Nightreign is a casual game. You absolutely cannot be deluded enough to think otherwise. It is supposed to be a low investment, silly game to play a couple of matches with the boys every once in a while, and then not think about for a while. Watching my rank 3 teammates and myself get one-shotted by a single move and losing the run is the funniest and most joyful moment I have played within this game. Also, clutching what realistically is an easy fight, but still having lower ranked players thank you for your efforts, is considerably more satisfying than playing with 2 other rank 5 drones, all of you expecting to win every single match and furious at the sight of a loss. Especially so when seeing your single revive bar with 2 other full bars on the field. I don't think I've ever received so much as a GG message after clutching a rank 5 match. More often, you'll instead see players dropping a winding on the ground so as to say, you didn't actually clutch, I would have had it if you died. But let me just show you a message I received after attempting a ridiculously long clutch attempt on a lower ranked enhanced balancers, where I revived my teammates from full bar many times, but eventually failed upon my first death. I functionally wasted like 15 minutes or more of these 2 people's lives in my attempt to win. And they still thanked me for it, because they are the real true Nightreign players. A casual duo who don't understand all of the mechanics of the game, but still hop on not expecting to win, but clearly excited at the notion they might. These are the people who the game should have been designed for, and instead they're stuck at a lower rank of a ranked mode within their RNG game. And I'll probably never match with them again. I'll never get the chance to redeem myself for a full carry, because I'm stuck at rank 5 now. with the other no-life chuds who understand this game to a degree that nobody really should. It's not fun anymore, and it hasn't been for a while. Now, there is one thing I'll quickly mention that I do think is a cool idea Deep of Night attempted to implement, however I have some complaints, which is the red weapons, which act as an interesting way of upgrading lesser weapons into the same tier as legendaries damage-wise. These weapons will drop with 2 positive passive effects and 1 negative one, which on paper does seem like a fair and balanced way to give the player an edge within the higher difficulty game mode. But in practice, the balance is not all that it would seem. When this game rolls for positive effects, it's selecting from a pretty wide pool of potential playstyles to buff, which means you have a 1 in, 5 chance of actually obtaining something useful for your character and for your playstyle. And let's just say maybe a 30% chance of obtaining a more universal passive benefit, like an increased damage negation at full health, or the cool charged heavy greases for your weapon effects. Anything else is just going to be a wasted passive slot for you, which means in practice, the majority of weapons will functionally have 1 positive effect, which means the majority of them will be less beneficial to you than a standard weapon with a standard single passive effect, because the red weapons will also be rolled with a negative effect, which are basically all rolled within a universally applicable passive negative effect. There are no negative effects that are playstyle specific. None that can be ignored outside of fringe situations, such as the Night Storm Circle effect, which becomes irrelevant once you've reached the Night Lord. Outside of that, every single negative will be directly negative towards you, meaning that a huge majority of the weapons that you will find will only have 1 passive buff and 1 passive debuff, unless you get very lucky. Like I said, this makes most red weapons more of a liability than a standard weapon with 1 single positive passive. But also, the negative effects are so poorly balanced that some are just completely nonsensical to run on your build at all. Anything with continuous HP drain when running full health effects are useless, which of course can sometimes embarrassingly roll on the same weapon. The multiple dodges reduces your damage negation effect is wildly risky to run, because the effect will last like 30 seconds after being triggered, and there are plenty of Night Lord boss moves which are perfectly reasonable to spam dodges against, like Caligo's ice machine gun. This cannot even be looked at as a just don't panic dodge situation, because the game calls for it sometimes. Sometimes it is the only answer. There are plenty of negative effects that fully reduce a weapon's utility to 0, and then they get left on the ground like the garbage they are, which is super fun in the RNG roguelike game. There's just so much replayability when the RNG system makes half of your loot useless. I would also say that the new relic slots suffer from the same problem. With their weird, sometimes negative effects, sometimes rolling normally system, you could actually roll a perfect relic only to have 1 negative that spoils the whole thing. For the most part, I just delete any relic with any negative effect whatsoever, because I don't care that much. I got decent ones already, and now I just delete anything that insists I should read more than a few words per relic. Anyway, back to the red weapons. I think a far better, more interesting system would be for the red weapons to have curated rolls, which excel at certain things, but also come at a specific cost with unique negative effects. Just off the top of my head, any fire weapon could be refitted to have the positive effect of a large health regen, alongside a scaling damage increase the lower your health becomes, and the negative effect could be that dealing damage burns your health away. Instead of an arbitrary system of handing out negative and positive effects willy-nilly, which results in a substantial amount of gear being useless, curated gear could enhance and encourage specific playstyles with less passive behind-the-scenes effects, and a greater focus on the red weapons being your main attacking weapon with the drawback you'll have to master. I don't know, I'm not married to this concept, but I do think the idea of the red weapons are closer to being good than they are bad. They're just suffering from Nightrein's systemic flaws. I once rolled a dragon scale katana with a charged heavy deals black flame effect, and the gameplay was suddenly more interesting because I could use the Ash of War to apply frostbite, and then remove the frostbite effect quickly with the charged heavy attack, so as to begin immediately building more frostbite. And that weapon just felt massively more special beneficial than any other I've ever rolled, because there was an extra gameplay mechanic to use in the heat of battle. It was an increase of mechanics and not just an increase to numbers. Anyway, just a thought. And I should mention that's a thought that's directly a result of a ranked mode being added to an RNG game. Obviously, curated roles fly in the face of the RNG and the very notion that this is a roguelike game, but a ranked mode does the exact same thing. Now, there was one aspect of Deep of Night that was kind of enlightening to me, and that is the experience playing it solo. When I first came back to the mode in my attempt to reach 5, I played through rank 3 in the solo mode, so as to refresh myself on the basic mechanics and boss moves without affecting other players' ranks. And one thing I learned from that experience is something that I might owe you an apology for. You see, within my original review of Nightreign, I mentioned that I was initially very skeptical that the game's solo mode would work well at all. But inevitably, I found it to be a pretty satisfying way to experience the base game. I largely enjoy fighting most of the formidable bosses solo in a more direct way, using mostly Elden Ring combat. And so I, in some way, recommended the game to solo players. It didn't fail nearly as much as I thought it would. But I must say, if I happen to convince you as a solo player to play this game, I am truly, humbly sorry for misinforming you. Again, I must default to mentioning that Nightreign was an incredibly hard game to understand before spending massive amounts of time playing it, and it never really understood what it wanted to be. What I'm trying to say is, the lack of the 3-player hack-and-slash aspect of the combat in Nightreign when playing solo means that you're going to be using mostly standard Souls combat for the majority of your gameplay. Now to me, on paper, that sounds nice. I much prefer playing Souls games to hack-and-slash games. But again, that concept is horribly leveraged against the time-based mechanics of Nightreign. The concept only works whatsoever if the player is given enough time to use their patience skill set within Souls combat effectively. And the further you get into Deep of Night, the more you'll understand that solo Nightreign is hanging on by a thread. It barely works whatsoever, because it's balanced to give you enough damage that you can kill bosses quickly enough that the timer doesn't matter much. Take your time and play Souls combat when playing solo, and you'll still end up pretty well geared by the end of Night 2. But that facade is quickly shattered the moment you apply even the most basic pressure to the concept, and start increasing enemy damage resistance with each rank. Solo Deep of Night stops functioning correctly around rank 4. And that's not to say that it's impossible to beat a rank 5 expedition solo. Again, let's have some nuance here. I'm saying it stops functioning as intended. You're not really playing Nightreign at a certain point. You're just using an absurdly optimized build and playing around the mechanics of the game instead of engaging with them. In practice, that means using more AoE attacks like Hoarfrost's Stomp to kill tons of basic enemies quickly, instead of spending much time challenging bosses. And a lot of that is due to the unintended gap of functional gameplay between killing basic enemies and defeating formidable opponents. The mini-boss class of enemies that would ordinarily be a standard stepping stone of progression within the game have one massive unfortunate side effect when placed in solo Deep of Night. And again, it comes down to these assets being stolen from another game. They weren't designed to be here. Their existence is an afterthought. You see, most of the great enemy, lesser class of boss fights throughout Nightreign have been taken from optional content within Elden Ring's world. And I've always had a philosophy about optional content in Souls, which is that they don't have to be as high quality to serve their purpose in the game. If you don't like a mini-boss, because they kinda suck, there's nothing stopping you from just skipping them for the most part. I've played Elden Ring over 100 times, and probably only killed the Royal Revenant mini-boss like seriously twice, possibly even once. It's not a good fight. It's just a large overworld enemy which occasionally has a health bar and protects some minor loot. It is exactly as well designed as it is important, which is not very at all. And there are tons of mini-bosses like this throughout Elden Ring which are just kind of annoying to fight. They're not really totally designed to be a fair and balanced back and forth battle. The Royal Revenant in particular has very few safe openings, but generally deals very little damage and can be one-shot by the endgame. However, when this entire class of shitty enemies makes up a step of progression throughout your expedition in Nightreign, and when you're playing solo high-ranked Deep of Night with mostly basic Souls gameplay at your disposal, bosses like Royal Revenant no longer become a viable option for the time it would require to defeat them. Shitty bosses, with damage resistance cranked up to level 5 levels, dealing nearly 3 times the damage, lose all functionality in the game. I remember seeing a TikTok when Deep of Night was first released, which was an executor at level 15 on rank 5 difficulty, taking on a red bell-bearing hunter. The dude got a perfect fight, deflecting every single attack, flexing on the mini-boss, which was impressive. However, this fight took over 7 minutes. There was no circle closing at any point throughout the video, and his character was inexplicably level 15 on Deep of Night 5 with well over 7 minutes to spare. And of course, the reality was apparent. This wasn't Nightreign gameplay, it was a modded scenario, just meant to show off how difficult deep rank 5 bosses are, and to flex on said boss. But just think about that for a moment. It took more than 7 minutes, a quarter of the total time of both night cycles combined, just to defeat the basement mini-boss with a max level character. In what world would that fight ever be a viable option within the actual gameplay of solo Deep of Night rank 5? The time investment would be massive, the reward might be utterly useless to you, and so you would likely just skip this fight on a real run. Although, another unfortunate aspect of Nightraign's design is that there really isn't the optional excuse anymore when approaching these enemies. On one hand, everything in the map is optional in Nightreign. You can just wait out the nights and fight at level 1 with your starting gear, but at that point you're not playing Nightreign anymore. Everything on the map is in this weird, ambiguous Schrodinger's cat state where it's all optional, but at the same time, none of it is. You really have to make the careful decision of what you're going to skip, because every time you skip something, you're spending a portion of your time to do so. You can't expect to succeed if you've avoided fighting everything that's wasteful of your time, and instead ran around the map fully wasting your total time. When all is said and done, this game is meant to be played with 3-player hack-and-slash tactics. It is the bandage that makes up for this game being such a ramshackle mess of assets. Playing solo Deep of Night has truly revealed to me just how much of an afterthought the single-player mode is. It can only function when the game is arbitrarily made easy enough to do so. Otherwise, you're stuck exploiting your way through the embarrassingly thoughtless design of this game as a whole. You will only succeed in the night sections of high-ranked gameplay if you can avoid actually fighting most of the enemies you plan to kill. What a silly thing to say about a so-called Souls game. Anyway, that's all I have to say about the Deep of Night, and I honestly thought that would take a lot longer. The vast majority of my gameplay meant to understand this game for the sake of this video was within this game mode, and yet it only makes up a small section of the video itself. Realistically, that is due to the fact that Deep of Night is again a massive nothing burger. It is everything I've already talked about with some awkward tweaks thrown in. It is a pointless ranked mode jammed into an RNG game with an equally pointless increase to difficulty, and few mechanics that actually end up resulting in interesting gameplay. And on top of all of that, there is quite literally no reward whatsoever for reaching rank 5. You get bragging rights, and by that I mean you get me calling you a fucking loser with shit taste in games. Maybe the real treasure was the friends who stopped playing this shit months ago we lost along the way. So, that's it, right? Every criticism I have about this miserable mess of misused assets and misunderstood lessons from the history of Souls. But I do have one last thing I would like to do before pontificating and philosophizing about the state of FromSoft and gaming, which is, I would like to compare this game to something that I consider to be a project of equal scale to Nightreign in many regards, but succeeds in ways that the Nightreign devs could only imagine. It is a passion project, whereas Nightreign is a profit product. Another $40 game made by a ragtag group of developers that builds off of their company's most successful game, both with theoretically infinite amounts of gameplay. Helldivers 2 succeeds in every way that Nightreign stumbles. First, let's talk about the assets used to facilitate the main gameplay of each game. Nightreign copy and pastes everything regardless of whether it actually plays well within their timed roguelike gameplay. Helldivers, on the other hand, has redesigned every single enemy unit borrowed from their first game to have an incredibly satisfying interplay and synergy with their weapons system. Every enemy unit is made up of many small pieces that all have their own function to create the final total asset that is any one bot, bug, or squid. I'll mostly be talking about the bots because they're the unit I have the most experience with. Every limb on the smallest bot unit has its own HP, which once depleted will be totally destroyed, which in the case of their arms leaves them disadvantaged but still kicking, and in the case of their legs or head will fully finish them off. This gives them several weak points to aim for if your weapon isn't strong enough to one-shot them. Now this, of course, is just basic gunplay within a shooter game. Aim for the weak points is nothing revolutionary, but we are just getting started within enemy design. The immediate upgrade to the basic bots leaves us with Devastators and Berserkers, who both have several different levels of armor across various points on their bodies. Now your standard basic weapon as a Helldiver will only be using light armor penetrating rounds, which will deal half damage against its equal light armor. However, it will deal 0 damage against medium armor or higher. With just one upgrade to the enemy unit, you're now much more pressed to aim for the enemy's weak points, either landing a perfect shot to the dome of an enemy whose face is surrounded by medium armor, or maybe you're desperate, wasting much more ammo in a panic to destroy their weapons systems, which are clearly telegraphing that they're about to obliterate you. You can shoot off a heavy Devastator's minigun arm or shatter a Rocket Devastator's shoulder-mounted rockets. Again, within just one upgrade of the enemy unit, you're already having to devise all kinds of contingency plans to defeat these enemies within incredibly chaotic scenarios. There's plenty to learn about even the most basic of enemy within Helldivers, all of which you'll learn in-game, which will increase your odds of survival within higher tiers of difficulty. There's also a huge difference in interactions between you and the enemies, based on what equipment you choose to drop with. Any of the more rare primaries that fire medium armor penetrating rounds can trivialize a lot of the fodder enemy units, often at the cost of lower ammo capacity or some other balancing feature. But that's not to say that you can't find more value in a weapon with less armor penetration so long as you can land your shots. My favorite weapon in the game right now is the Sensor, a silenced marksman rifle with only light armor penetration. It hits hard enough to deal with unarmored bots and one-shots anything that I have the time to line up a headshot for. To me, it fills the perfect role within my kit. But of course, there are a large amount of enemies that do exceed its weight class. The Hulk is a heavy bot unit with mostly tier 3 armor across its body, requiring heavy armor penetration weapons to deal with them whatsoever, outside of the heatsink on their back, which can be destroyed for an easy light penetration kill, but will likely require teamwork. It's much easier to instead bring one of the many heavy armor penetrating or higher support weapons along with you. These powerful stratagems will be carried on your back and will find unmatched utility against many of the heavily armored units. However, most will function huge trade-offs, like being an expendable weapon which must be disposed of after firing its payload, or requiring a backpack slot to reload ammunition, or having an unsafe mode that must be fired before the weapon explodes, or having a stationary reload, or being the Quasar Cannon, having no drawbacks whatsoever and desperately needing a nerf. Seriously, this thing should be an instant pick on every bot mission like ever? Shit's way too overpowered. Infinite ammo, less cooldown between shots on cold planets, no backpack slot necessary, no danger of your weapon exploding, infinite range with no bullet drop, anti-tank armor penetration. It's poisoning the sandbox. Anyway, long story short, every enemy within this game is thoughtfully, intentionally, and carefully made to offer a specific challenge to the players. And every player ability, weapon, explosive, booster trait, vehicle, stratagem, and the total system of armor penetration is made to find a synergistic challenge for the Helldivers to overcome. You only get so many stratagems. You only have one slot for a support weapon, one backpack, and the choice to bring one type of grenade. All of which you'll have to manage to avoid dying and draining your finite amount of reinforcements before they cut you off, requiring a cooldown. all while you have a 40-minute timer to complete all of the objectives on the map. The objectives being another aspect of Helldivers, which is crafted in a way that offers just so much more replayability than Nightreign does. Every map of Helldivers is procedurally generated, using the basic terrain assets of whatever specific planet you're dropping onto, creating a unique area you've never seen before. You just don't know what's around any corner aside from basic aerial information from your minimap. You'll have to explore your environment, identify both enemy encampments as well as helpful tactical assets, while completing a more substantial total mission, every piece of which is uniquely and randomly placed by the game generating an area for any given mission. Let's just take one small piece of this map, which I see as comparable to the compound in Nightreign. The Stratagem Jammer, an optional objective which divers will find to be an extreme hindrance to their mission within its area of effect. You can approach this objective in a variety of ways, yet none are guaranteed to be completely effective. The standard way would be to fight your way to the console within the compound, which has several potential spawns, and that's 1 point for the replayability of the Stratagem Jammers in Helldivers, when compared to the Nightreign compounds, which have an incredibly static design and will always be approached the same way with largely a guaranteed likelihood of success. Point 2 for Helldivers comes down to the enemy placement within its jammer compound, which is also randomized. Sometimes you'll luck out and only have to face a couple of scout striders, but other times it will be an incredibly hard-fought battle just to reach the console, and only then can you begin the process of completing the sub-objective. That is, if there wasn't a bot drop called on you for reinforcements, or a patrol in the area which spots you and resumes the battle once more. Which is another point for Helldivers. The areas around each player has the potential to spawn enemy patrols, whereas Nightreign's map outside of compounds will always have the same static enemy placements. Back to the Stratagem Jammer, after fending off the enemies for long enough to shut down the jammer, your task is to destroy it, with a hell bomb that you call down from your Super Destroyer space vessel, which has to be dropped close enough to the jammer and activated before it can blow. However, the maps are randomized in their entirety, and so what happens if 2 jammers are close enough for their jamming radius to affect one another? Well, you now have to begin the process once more to deactivate the second jammer, just so you can call down a hell bomb on each of them. Now, with all that basic information about Stratagem Jammers, you now have the choice to go into a bot mission with equipment that will increase your odds of success. You could bring down equipment outside of the jammer's radius prior to assaulting the structure, including a support weapon, a backpack, and a mech suit, an allotment of firepower which should give you a massive edge. However, cannot easily be replaced once within the range of the jammer's radius. You can prepare all you want and still get caught off guard by a stray missile or laser turret shooting you, which you didn't notice until you were already in the shit. But of course, you could also take the most simple route possible, and just bring with you a portable hell bomb strapped to your back. All you have to do is activate it within range of the jammer and hope that you can make it out before the detonation. Or of course, you can go down with the jammer, sacrificing everything for the good of Super Earth. There are about 40 trillion different scenarios that can play out when approaching just one single bot structure, because Helldivers is built from the ground up with a vision behind its design. A vision of chaotic, heart-pounding gameplay which rewards knowledge and skill but never truly guarantees your success. It is a game that fully allows itself to be immersed within its random nature because there is no final boss at the end. You can finish the main objective early and then spend the rest of the match clearing sub-objectives. You can extract with samples early, leaving enemy camps on the board like an undemocratic coward. Or you can spend every single reinforcement ensuring that the socialist clankers are razed from this part of the world. At the end of the day, a mission with no survivors where every single objective on the map was completed is still a massive success in spreading managed democracy across the galaxy. Because that's the true final boss of the game, a collective effort from the entire community to wage campaigns to beat back our enemies. And so, the gameplay was designed to offer as much replayability to the player as possible. This second galactic war will not end anytime soon. It will wage on with new enemy units added to the front lines, new weapons, vehicles, and stratagems to utilize against them, taking advantage of their weak points, all played within the same incredible system of map generation that we've had since launch. I'll throw in another anecdote here, but to me, by the end of a 40-minute Nightreign match, I'm left drained and mentally numbed, ready for a long nap. By the end of one match, you've played through an exhausting assortment of objectives that you've completed in the exact same way since shortly after the game's release, after the point where a meta was established of what content was useful to complete and which pieces of content are wasteful of your time. You've beaten the same formidable opponents with the same style of hack and slash combat that you've beaten 1,000 times before. And the final boss is just the nothing cherry on top of the nothing burger you've been playing for over a half an hour. But on the other hand, an entire super Helldive campaign of Helldivers, generally consisting of 2 40-minute missions and 1 15-minute mission, only leaves me feeling like I've done my part within this war, and ordinarily leaves me wanting more. I've never played Helldivers for any other reason than I want to keep playing. And there are plenty of in-game reasons why the game is so satisfying to endlessly play. Helldivers has several systems in place to offer progression that always make you feel like you're accomplishing something on a successful mission. Until, that is, you've no-lifed the game to a point where you've completed them all. The first is to unlock your base game stratagems with requisition slips, a basic currency awarded on successful missions whether or not you've extracted. These stratagems will be available to purchase as you increase your level up to level 20, where there are some pretty powerful options, if you have the slips. Along the way of early game progression, you'll also be awarded medals for successful missions, and completions of minor and major orders, which are community objectives that you'll probably not feel overly responsible for completing, but will act as an occasional substantial drop of the currency, which you'll spend on the free war bond, essentially an in-game battle pass, integrated to be your main source of obtaining new equipment, weapons, grenades, armor, boosters, and such. Throughout the main base game content, you'll grind through this battle pass, but eventually outgrow it, and then you'll transition to the premium battle passes, which will also use medals to unlock their content after purchasing them with super credits. Super credits are another source of progression in this game, purchasable as a microtransaction, but also grindable in-game. When I played on PC, I purchased 5 of the battle passes with purely currency I earned in-game. However, when the console version released, I did have to catch up quite a bit and purchased a good amount of the credits with real money. But if you were a dedicated enough diver, you could earn every single bit of the content within the Warbond system with pure grit and grind. And honestly, if I had more time on my hands, I would have liked to have done that. It's a perfectly good reason to play the hell out of this game, and would prove you to be the ultimate diver, with every single piece of gear available to you, which you've earned through experience in-game. Anyway, another piece of progression system is the samples, which have to be extracted from the mission to obtain them and can be used to upgrade various pieces of your super destroyer for a variety of passive effects across the game. This is one of the more finite gameplay systems, which you'll eventually cap out on after upgrading everything, at which point you'll never really have to extract successfully ever again, except for the sake of LARPing and a small amount of bonus XP, I believe. But before that point, it is a very successful and immersive gameplay progression system. You really feel the weight of a high sample extraction mission and the pain of having dropped many samples somewhere you're not going to be able to retrieve them. Now lastly, there's Weapon XP, which caps out at level 25, unlocking some basic weapon attachments and skins along the way. And this is a pretty paper-thin reason to play the game, but it is still something, if you were to want to cap out on every possible reason to play the game. In the end, there is always a system of progression that could encourage you to keep playing Helldivers until the very moment that you've unlocked every warbond, every stratagem, every ship upgrade, and leveled every single weapon, which would be an absurd amount of gameplay, and even then, new warbonds come out quite frequently. If we compare that to Nightreign, all that it has to keep you playing is Merc and Sovereign sigils, which can be used interchangeably for the most part to buy skins or relics. That's it. My point is that Helldivers is a deeply meaningful game if you buy into the Galactic War concept. Every single mission is not only a point of progression for you, but also a real battle that was fought, win or lose, within the galactic conflict. Every single kill and death is logged as a canonical event, your contributions or failures towards the war effort. But Nightreign, even if you buy into the world, is much more meaningless. You play every single expedition once or twice, and you've seen all the content. You've saved the world from night or whatever, and then of course you play the enhanced version of the Night Lords, and wonder if they're even canon bosses, or if they're just supposed to act as more content. But again, after playing them once, you've seen all the content in this game. And yet you're expected to want to play this game forever with no meaningful reason to do so. Because deep down on a fundamental level, Nightreign is a meaningless game. And to me, that's one of the most offensive and insulting aspects of the whole game, because it's tied itself to Elden Ring in such an ignorant and thoughtless way. But you know, maybe I've just spent too long glazing Elden Ring. Too long building it up in my mind as the greatest game I've ever played, when in reality it was just as meaningless an experience as the whole IP is meaningless to FromSoft themselves, proven by them allowing their game to be pilfered from by these mod-tier developers. Maybe Elden Ring didn't have great bosses, wasn't made with care, and didn't create a world worth exploring. Maybe Elden Ring was never that special at all. Well, better play it again to find out.
O Erd Tree, you shall burn. Burn for the sake of the new Lord. Thank you for guiding me here. The one who walks alongside flame shall one day meet the road of destined death. Goodbye.
Elden Ring is one of the greatest games ever made. It was made with so much passion, intention, vision, and care. And it is absolutely sickening to compare back to back just how much Nightreign has shit on its legacy. Elden Ring built up a living world designed to be explored at your own pace and appreciated for its subtle little details. But Nightreign just arbitrarily scooped up a chunk of it to use for their shitty, boring game, where players burst sprint and inexplicably spirit spring through the scenery without it meaning anything to them. The Lands Between was a masterpiece painted upon a canvas of its own design, whereas Limvale uses a chunk of that masterpiece and doodles stickmen across it, finger-painted in poop. Now, let's talk about weapons and how they're treated across these games. The Marius Executioner's Greatsword is located in one single location within Elden Ring, liberated from Elmer of the Briar within the Shaded Castle. An heirloom of House Marius, it was a weapon that was once intended to execute Elmer himself. However, he took it from them with his telekinetic magic and slaughtered the whole house, before taking their castle as his own. It's only after you defeat Elmer there that you will have access to his weapon after assaulting his castle and experiencing all the visual storytelling that's layered throughout the Legacy Dungeon's design. It is a carefully crafted area complete with storytelling, ambience, adventure, and a climactic battle at the topmost point of this castle, and rewards you with a weapon that was thoughtfully placed here within the hands of a man whose ruthlessness had earned him the blade. Well, how is the same weapon handled in Nightreign? It's a weapon dropped from something random. It's also most infamous in Nightreign for being used in an exploit, and it's nothing more than that. Well, what about the Sacred Relic Sword, the reward for beating the entire base game of Elden Ring, which is speculated to be the physical remains of Radagon after you've beaten him, manipulated by the Elden Beast into the shape of a sword. In Nightreign, it's a weapon. All that any weapon can be in Nightreign is just a random weapon dropped by a random enemy. And you know, if Nightreign wanted to be its own thing with its own weapons unique to the game, sure, everything could have just been random. And sure, if the game was just a free, non-canonical mod game, the inclusion of Elden Ring's weapons wouldn't be all that insulting. However, once again, Nightreign gets to have its cake and eat it too. It gets to be the special game with infinite excuses for its trashy design. It gets to have random wackiness, but also imply that Radagon's corpse is just meaninglessly stashed somewhere in the inventory of some random boss in the castle basement. It is deeply insulting to the game it stole all of its content from. Nightreign is a meaningless game. It's not trying to be a good roguelike, it's not trying to be a good Souls game, it's not trying to have good mechanics and systems of progression, and it's not trying to tell a good story with a compelling antagonist. Instead, you fight the Night Lords, bad guys who are bad guys because they are bad guys. Agents of the Night, whatever that's really supposed to mean. All fought within the same arena outside of time and space. An ambiguous threat in an ambiguous location with ambiguous stakes. All that Nightreign is trying to do is to be just good enough to justify its price tag. Well, price tags now that the DLC is out, and just entertaining enough to keep you playing up to the point where they could sell you the DLC. Now, at this point, you might be thinking, yeah, who cares? It's just a video game at the end of the day. All games are meaningless. And to that, I would say I wholeheartedly disagree. And I would like to explain, so please bear with me through some philosophy I live my life by, which mostly centers around capitalism and how capitalism has affected the human experience. Now, before you go commenting thinking that I'm taking some hard stance either for or against any economic system, you should probably hear me out. I'd like to think that I apply nuance to most of my takes, even if I come off as hyperbolic most of the time. You see, I think it's fair to say that capitalism is the most effective system on the planet in regards to production. If something has value and makes money, capitalists are likely going to go all in on it. Hence the reason the American diet is made up of 110% corn. Well, that and subsidies, but my point is, people don't often starve in America because we've become masters of production or unethically outsourcing production. The part that most people like to ignore, however, is that Americans do have an excess when it comes to deaths of despair. Americans don't starve, yet an unacceptable amount of people, in my eyes, fall through the cracks. Which is odd. We really should be happy with all the cool shit we have, right? Why would anyone end their life when they can get a hamburger for $5 and download a free-to-play game on their space-age smartphone? Well, in my opinion, the reason for this is because there was a massive cost to the absurd production that takes place under capitalism, which is that people across the board living under the effects of capitalism live less purposeful lives. Just think about this. Before the Industrial Revolution, you could have been a baker. You would bake bread, which would put money in your pocket, which you would then use to raise a family or whatever else you were interested in. The better you were at baking bread, the more efficient you were at baking it, or more delicious your bread was, the better off you would be. Your purpose in life would be to bake bread, to supply your community with that product, and see realistic benefits in your life the better a baker you became. However, that same position under modern capitalism would likely be closer to a factory worker, someone staring at a conveyor belt all day, watching thousands upon thousands of loaves get baked by a massive machine. Your overall portion of the output of bread into your community or country at that scale would be immense compared to a single baker. Purely production-wise, you would comparatively be the god of bread when placed against a single man with a single oven. However, you wouldn't even consider yourself a baker. You don't know how to make bread, and even if you did, it wouldn't have any effect on your job. You are effectively a meaningless cog in the machine despite your overall productivity feeding thousands of people a day. In short, capitalism largely trades the human experience of having a small-scale but personally meaningful profession for the sake of wide-scale production. And again, I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing so long as people are properly compensated for their labor. It's a problem with human psychology, really. From a cold, calculating perspective, there's no reason someone should feel purposeless if their labor is wildly productive. But in practice, when separated from a skill set to identify with and actively develop throughout your life, and without seeing gradual increases to the quality of your life for performing your job well, you are going to feel replaceable. You're going to feel purposeless, which is bad for everyone and is one of the hidden failures of capitalism. You're expected to find meaning in your life outside of your 9 to 5, outside of the point in your life where you are fundamentally most valuable to your community, and somehow fit whatever it is that gives you meaning within the free time you have when not working and not doing daily maintenance to stay alive. I think this is why people subconsciously gravitate towards video games, even despite the common belief that they're a waste of time. Video games are purpose simulators, which you engage with, are given a goal, and work to achieve that goal. And the reason that many games are easy to know life is because they're designed with a system of progression to them. You might go to your job and end up doing the exact same procedure every day, but when you get home, you can play Minecraft. You can enter that world building a house or something, and when you log off for the night, you will be able to return to that world tomorrow, knowing that your labors have paid off in some small way. Your actions today will be beneficial to you tomorrow. To me, that's truly why video games are meaningful, and largely why they are important to people. They give an artificial source of purpose to compensate when people's true purpose has failed to manifest itself psychologically. And I think people tend to misappropriate that feeling as a sense of relaxation, the irony of which is often commented on, but rarely fully understood. Why would you play some stressful shooter game to relax? Well, the way I see it, it's not relaxation, it's satiation. Scratching the itch of purposelessness you feel in the real world, giving you a chance to excel at something personally or build something that's entirely yours. There should be absolutely no shame in working a factory job or any job that provides value to the world. And if you feel purposeless in your employment, yet find solace in silly little video games, then nobody should try to take that away from you. The way things are, video games are important. You couldn't convince me otherwise. Do I think an overall better system would be for everyone to have a meaningful small-scale employment? Maybe. But that's hypothetical, and I'm talking about reality. And the reality is, video games are meant to be meaningful. And that's why I hate to see something like Nightreign, A game that's entire purpose is to provide an infinite amount of meaningless content. I think games like this really do a lot of damage to people, and subtly spread a benign depression amongst all who regularly consume this content. In the heat of my attempts to reach deep level 5 and to fully understand this game, I found myself in the grips of this unfortunate reality. After reaching depth 5, I wasn't playing the game with any expectation of enjoyment, yet I found myself loading the game up out of habit more so than having any real reason or drive to play it. It was the game I felt most comfortable playing for a while, even if that was a false comfort which faded after the first match of the day, leaving me to feel betrayed by the content. It was supposed to be there for me. It was supposed to be infinite, but the enjoyment certainly wasn't. I was playing the exact same run of Nightreign over and over, and it was only in hindsight that I realized that I had been feeling that emptiness for a long time. I had seen everything this game had to offer well before reaching rank 5. The final difficulty spike was nothing I hadn't seen before, especially considering the RNG nature of Nightreign's design. Like I said, deep 5 matches with good loot and good teammates are considerably easier than deep 4 matches with bad. And this phenomena of being unaware of just how depressed a game is actively making me and just how unfulfilling the gameplay is nothing new to me. I've experienced the exact same thing when returning to Destiny after periods of abstaining from it. At first, the new content is exciting and fun, and there's a ton of it, but not long later and you'll find yourself logging in because the game expects you to, not because you actually want to. You find yourself running the same activities over and over each week, despite there being no relevant loot left to receive from those activities. And by the time you realize you don't want to play anymore, you're likely to understand that you haven't wanted to play for a while. And yet, after finally taking a step away from such a game, you'll unfortunately find a hole in your life remains where the game once was. Because the hollow experience it had been providing you will leave a hollowness in its absence, which you might struggle to fill for a while, having relied on it as a comfortable source of wasting time. However, I wholeheartedly believe that video games are supposed to be more than just a waste of time. They should fill you with a temporary purpose. They should be meaningful. I truly hate these infinite meaningless games, especially when they don't know their place in the gaming world. Meaningless games should never encourage players to invest in them. They should not incentivize players to no-life them and learn every single awkward-ass mechanic and counterintuitive boss moveset like Deep of Night does. Nightreign should have stuck to being the casual game it was always meant to be. It is not meaningfully designed enough and did not earn its difficulty enough to expect player investment. And if you find yourself playing this game every day in an effort to reach Deep 5, or maybe just out of habit, especially if you queue alone, I would encourage you to uninstall the next time you lose a match. And not just to never play the game again, but if anything, just to place one extra layer of inconvenience between you and potentially getting lost in an unending cycle of playing a hollow, meaningless game. If I'm wrong and the game is worth playing, you should have no problem reinstalling 20 gigabytes. That's nothing in today's day and age. But if I'm right, I might just be giving you the nudge you need to realize that you can improve your life in small ways, including finding a game that's more meaningful to you. Try Helldivers, or replay old Souls games, or do another run of Elden Ring. Now let's begin wrapping this whole video up with something that pertains to what I've been talking about this whole time, which is that Nightreign is effectively immune to any meaningful criticism. But why is that? Well, the easy answer is just to point out how the game requires a ton of time investment and mental space. Another easy answer is to say that people just don't care enough to shit on something that others enjoy. Again, this is a paper-thin explanation. We're talking about adults here. I'm pretty sure most people can handle a realistic look at their favorite slop game without having a panic attack. Lastly, we could argue the mainstream narrative explanation. FromSoft is more popular than they've ever been, and offer large content creators massive benefits for glazing their work. To go against the grain and argue that From's content is falling off would be to paint a rather large target on your back as a counterculture, Debbie Downer, hipster asshole who just wants to ruin other people's fun. In other words, a jester of juice. But I don't think that any of those individual explanations really offer a satisfying total answer as to why Nightreign goes without criticism. But I do think that in total they culminate into one single answer that does. Which is, Nightreign isn't being criticized because FromSoft as we know it is dying. There's a subtle disconnect that certain people have when they begin to see something degrade in quality, whether or not they realize that they're disconnecting, because they only associate their allegiance to that thing with its sense of quality. Anything lesser isn't something they feel obligated to talk about, because it's just not content that's geared towards them. Why voice a criticism when you could instead just take a step back for a while? When you see quality get put onto the back burner, you yourself, as someone who appreciates that quality, gets put on the back burner. And nobody wants to be someone yapping from the back burner. There's a bigger fish that's currently being fried, and that fish's name is cash grab content. It's unironically a very similar mindset to what's described in that "When They Came for the Socialists" poem. Something like, "When they made Armored Core a simplistic, fully priced game, I did not speak out, because I wasn't an Armored Core fan," etc., etc. Cut to, why aren't the games good anymore? FromSoft used to make games for me. After Elden Ring's release, FromSoft has announced or released a slew of slop content products rather than art. Armored Core was a lazily made full-price game. Shadow of the Erdtree was a half-baked, aborted sequel released as a shitty expansion. An Elden Ring movie is in the works, as well as an unnecessary re-release of Elden Ring on Switch 2. Nightreign was a failed experiment that borrowed all of its assets from Elden Ring, including its name, and then geared its content to a different fanbase of roguelike enjoyer. And Duskbloods is a Switch 2 exclusive, and therefore has made itself completely irrelevant. Just how many products is FromSoft allowed to shit out before you notice that they haven't made a piece of art in years? When are you going to be angry about this? When are you going to hold FromSoft accountable for their descent into consumer slop content? When are you going to realize that FromSoft is circling the drain? Nobody is voicing their complaints, and I feel like I'm going insane right now because I've played these games before. I've watched as my favorite games got their creative fuel drained away into other projects, only for the property to continue existing like a shadow of their former selves, wasting away while the least critical fans of that property prop it up for far too long, refusing to just put it out of its misery. I've watched Halo get sold to the highest bidder and flounder about with each post-Bungie game, introducing a random, incongruent, and inevitably abandoned plotline. I watched the Ark devs bet everything on Atlas, a failure that crashed and burned almost immediately, forcing them to profit off of Ark once more and create the worst reboot I've ever played, a downgrade in every measurable metric. I was there day one of the Destiny beta, and I played every single piece of content they ever released for Destiny 1. I believed in the game even when every person thought it was a flop. I believed in it so hard that I wanted to support it in any small way I possibly could. And unfortunately that meant that I too fell into the trap that helped destroy Destiny. When microtransactions were introduced, I saw them as a fun, unimportant way to help fund Destiny's development. I bought just about every single microtransaction that was released within Destiny 1's Eververse store, because I thought that I was voting with my wallet, voting for Destiny to succeed. And I just wasn't aware enough at the time to realize that I wasn't voting for Destiny, I was voting for the microtransactions themselves. When art sells and is celebrated, companies will sell you art. But when products sell, companies will always prioritize the product. Because art is hard to make. It takes the time and effort of incredibly talented people to make someone feel something in a meaningful way. But products, they're quite easy to print out. And as soon as a company realizes that they have a complicit enough audience willing to consume their products, well, you've just chummed the fucking water, my friend. Get ready for copy-paste mod slop with premium DLCs, and pivots to the less powerful console because the games there should be easier to make. That is my prediction for the future, that FromSoft will eat itself alive due to the incompetence of ghoulish money dipshits, too stupid to realize that golden goose meat isn't as sustainable as eggs. And there's no going back once you've sold out, dumb fucks. Enjoy the echo chamber of an ever-dwindling population of players shouting, "We're so back," to themselves every time you manage to mimic something that was once great. The weird thing is, it's just so obvious in hindsight. Almost every game that's ever put the money first has died. Why wouldn't the people who love money just keep letting the artists around them make them rich? The world just feels so counterintuitive sometimes that you'll often find yourself asking, is everyone in charge just fucking stupid? And the easy answer is yes, a bunch of out-of-touch dimwits run the entire world. But I would like to offer an alternative that, to me, makes the world make a bit more sense in this regard. And it centers around a concept that I refer to as an egregore, which I believe denotatively is more focused on esoteric spiritual situations than realistic ones, but I like the word and so I'm going to appropriate it. In spiritual terms, the word egregore is referring to a metaphysical entity created when people come together or think alike, a thought monster. But the way I like to use it is much more physical and realistic. In any situation where many small things come together to create something bigger than themselves and independent to themselves. The best example I have is you, yourself. You are an egregore created by the collective intentions of every cell in your body. However, you aren't cells, you're just made of cells. You're you. You are experiencing the world in an incomprehensible way in relation to your cells. They will never understand you. They will never know what it is to be human. And one of the most confusing aspects about egregores in relation to the bits that they're made of is that the two don't always have similar goals in mind. Let me just give you an extreme example. Every cell in your body works hard every single second of every single day to keep you alive and healthy, because they cannot survive without you. They dedicate every moment to your continued survival. It is their singular purpose. And despite all of that, you could just have a really bad day and choose to end your own life. And there's nothing that a single cell in your body could do to stop you, because egregores and their component parts don't exist on the same level of consciousness. Our cells are ancient creatures which have passed down a lineage of survival through 7 mass extinction events, millions upon millions of years of pure survival. And they can do nothing in the face of their human egregore jerking off with a belt around their neck and falling unconscious. And I think we humans too create egregores that exist all around us, called companies and political groups and social media sites, which are infantile compared to our overall knowledge, but don't exist on the same plane of consciousness as we do, and will always result in confusing, counterintuitive situations. A corporate egregore will always do what makes the most money, even when it alienates the consumer base that they rely on. It's less of a logical decision and more one that is based on keeping the egregore well fed, keeping money flowing to shareholders, expanding the company's workforce, and keeping all of their paychecks coming. A million little decisions, a million opinions that all culminate in the most dull, dim-witted answer imaginable. Always sell out. To relate this to FromSoft, my biggest fear about them growing isn't just that they've diluted their overall talent of their workforce with fresh hires, split amongst various smaller scale projects. It's that their growth could have turned them into an egregore, a being that from now on isn't smart enough to understand that their lifeblood is art made by artists, not products shit out by developer drones, copy-pasting reused assets into serviceable enough forms to call them something new with a price tag slapped on. Now, one thing I absolutely want to make clear is that I've been using the term Nightreign devs a lot throughout this video as a sort of catch-all term to mean whoever was responsible for this product, whoever was in charge of the project. And I mean that in a very liberal sense, not specifically the game's director, unless he truly is the guiding force behind this game. When I call something stupid, like the entire relic system, I'm not even coming close to saying that the individuals who worked on the system are stupid, or even the people in charge of them. I'm saying that whoever decided the major decisions about this game is a fucking idiot. The total systemic decisions that led this game to be a $40 copy-paste game shit out with no vision behind its design. Now, is there a chance that this is the exact game that the full dev team wanted it to be? That there was no pressure behind its design that forced it to be so shitty? Maybe. But in that case, every single person who worked on it is a fucking idiot. But I would never suggest that. I do not believe that the people who worked on this project are happy with it. It doesn't feel like anything close to a passion project to me. My explanation is that a money ghoul was involved in the design of this game. I believe that a money ghoul is the reason that there's no vision behind this game's design. I believe that a dipshit money ghoul is the reason for the copy-paste, for the lack of synergy between the Night Cycle and Night Lord gameplay, for the lack of polish within the systems of progression, and for every other stupid fucking decision made in the design of this game. Most importantly of all, the price tag. And the very idea that there might be money ghouls involved in the decision-making of FromSoft design, I think is the first symptom of their metamorphosis into a corpo egregore. From their beginnings, all the way through Elden Ring, there was never a moment where I would have assumed that FromSoft was anything less than a group of people passionate about making games. And sure, there were stumbles in the road, like how they ran out of time when making DS1, which is why Lost Izalith sucks so much. But even taking into account all the criticisms I have towards DS1, I would only really attribute that to them spending too much time in other areas of the game, or just not being given enough time or resources to work on the game in the first place. I've always said that FromSoft's greatest strength is that they learn and evolve through every project they work on, growing smarter and more experienced along the way. The easy way to frame that is to say, every game tries something new, and every DLC is the perfected form of that experience. I see Bloodborne as mid, yet it has incredibly cool systems like the gun parry, trick weapons, and the boss limb-crippling mechanic, which is at its absolute best within its DLC. Before Armored Core and Shadow of the Erdtree, FromSoft only seemed to me to release content that they wanted to make, an experience they were passionate about creating and then honing into its ultimate form. But Shadow of the Erdtree only has a few boss fights that feel well placed within the world, and polished enough to be assumedly made by people who wanted to make it, Bale and Mesmer, and the rest feels like it was made out of an obligation. An obligation to make the world arbitrarily huge and then fill that huge map with just enough half-assed content to say, there, we did it. Can we go home now? I think the creative talent has been milked for all their worth and then milked some more by the growing egregore called FromSoft. Instead of nurturing their abilities and creativity within an environment that promotes the creation of art, we now have product after product with little to latch onto to even maintain the idea that FromSoft will be so back anytime soon. And if I'm not entirely off base with my assessment, which, trust me, as usual, I hope I'm wrong, but if I'm not, FromSoft never really will be back. That is the nature of the egregore. It cannot even begin to understand why it will inevitably fail. I think the internet connected the world in a way that created a fertile environment for egregores to flourish unlike they ever had before. And the greatest challenge our generation will face will be to find a way to either destroy or tame the egregores, the manifestation of many of our total problems. They need to either work for the benefit of mankind or be dismantled as efficiently as possible. And how might we be able to do something like that? Well, just think of any fantasy property where the little guys face off against something larger than them. We have to use their own power against them. We need kaiju suits to take on the other kaiju, or to obtain the power of great runes to eventually face off against the god. We need to create our own egregores, whose sole purpose is to keep the others in line and destroy them if necessary. We need to use collective action and create something bigger and stronger than us, made out of ourselves. A metaphorical mech suit that we can use to battle the monsters, destroying everything we need or care about. And you might be thinking, well, isn't that a little bit dramatic? I mean, it's just video games we're talking about here. Don't we have bigger problems going on in the world right now? And to that, I would say, exactly. We do have bigger problems in the world right now, and most of them have the exact same source and exact same answer. Big groups of dumb fucks breaking shit that they're too stupid to realize they'll someday need because it makes them money right now, which can only be defeated by our collective action. And that's why I think it's important to start here. How the fuck are we ever going to stop corporations from destroying our environment or fascist governments from taking away our rights if we can't even get our video game companies to stop bankrupting themselves with moronic profit-based decisions? This is our tutorial boss. Something low stakes to prove that we do have a voice. We want more art and less products. And how do we make that message known? No, I'm seriously asking. Does anybody know what we can do? What, you thought I would have some answers? I'm just some fucking dumbass yapping about games. I don't know anything. Fuck. I mean, give me a sec, okay? I'll come up with something. Okay, well, to start, we need to begin looking at FromSoft games as though they weren't made by FromSoft. Would you have purchased Nightreign if it wasn't for the Elden Ring name, the FromSoft logo, and for it being shoved in your face with marketing? I can pretty confidently say that I would not have. And I honestly wish I would have stuck to my guns originally and wouldn't have purchased it. It really is nothing without the FromSoft name, and only maintained the illusion of being worth playing out of curiosity, wanting to see every piece of FromSoft's catalog, or to maintain a comfortable place within the FromSoft community. I would say the same of Armored Core, a game I had no interest in outside of my blind allegiance to FromSoft, which was broken with Shadow of the Erdtree's release. I'm definitely not buying Duskbloods because I'm not buying a Switch 2, so that one's an easy skip, but that might be a much more difficult decision if I were to have one. I would have to consider what the gameplay looks like when we get something more substantial within promotional content later on. I think it's a good idea to separate yourself from the identity you have as an enjoyer of FromSoft, because I believe that FromSoft isn't the same beast it once was. From now on, we should consider ourselves gamers who like well-designed challenges within beautifully disturbing worlds. But that, of course, is a simple bandage on a much more complicated problem. I don't think we'll fully be able to starve the products out and nurture the art. There will just be too great an ecosystem of content creators who suckle off of the FromSoft teat and their respective audiences to affect the bottom line that much. The way I see it, there's not much hope of success in saving the soul of a company once they've begun their sellout metamorphosis. But fuck it, low odds of success has never stopped me before. Believe it or not, I've had sex a couple of times. Stranger things have happened. I have one last idea for us to collectively use, and if we're able to properly implement it, I do have faith that it would be effective. However, this is going to be the harshest truth I have ever had to describe to you. You are not going to like it, but here it goes. Video games should cost more. Video games should be like $100 at this point. When I was a kid 1,000 years ago, video games were $60, and up until just a few years ago, they've maintained that $60 price tag. For whatever weird reason, they've been immune to the inflation that has affected everything else in the world. The fucking quesarito used to be like $2 when it first released, and when brought back, it was over $5. And listen, I'm proud that we've been able to put our foot down and collectively say that we won't pay more for games. That's the exact type of energy I'm looking for here, but it's just much more passive and guttural than it is logical and based in reality. Of course, nobody wants to pay more, but there has to come a point where we have to ask ourselves, what was the cost of keeping the price down? Microtransactions, battle passes, crunch time for devs, loot boxes, and God knows what else could have been potentially avoided if the price of games had kept up with inflation a little more accurately. As it stands, games are incentivized to have as little base content as possible within the static now $70 price tag of the released game, and instead disperse the effort that otherwise would have gone into a completed base game into other premium content. There is no reason that Nightreign couldn't have shipped with up to the Forsaken Hollows' content, but splitting it up has given the total content of the slop game a near full game's price tag for the copy-paste game. And I know what you're probably thinking at this point. I sound just like that out-of-touch douchebag at Rockstar who's trying to sell GTA 6 for like $200 or something. And listen, that dude is probably just some executive dickhead who wants a new Audi or something. Fuck that asshole. But the problem is, he's fucking right, unfortunately. GTA 6 has been worked on for a very long time. It has been delayed so as to make it the best game it can possibly be. It will probably have enough content and enough quality to be worth that $200 price tag. Not for me, I don't really give a fuck about GTA, I might not even buy it. But realistically, if we're being the adults in the room for a moment, GTA should be more expensive than $70. And realistically, Elden Ring should have been more than $70. Nightreign should have been free because it was made by incompetent morons, but Elden Ring could have easily shipped for over $100 and been worth every penny. And maybe if it was, the devs who made it wouldn't have gotten burned out by the size of the game they had developed, and wouldn't have gone on the record saying they'll never make another game the size of Elden Ring. Maybe they would have been given more time to make the game, and therefore more time to rest between making it, if the company knew they were going to charge more for it. Because that's really my goal here at the end of the day. I want the artists taken care of, so that they can see their vision of design all the way to completion without having to worry about financial nonsense getting in the way. But is there any hope of undoing the damage that's been done through the absurd neglect of artists who make the games for us? Is there any way that a $100 standard price tag for video games eliminates the existence of microtransactions or other silly profit motive ideas and get the artists the resources they need? Or will executives just pocket the money while still including microtransactions while also working their artists to the bone? Well, there is one hope to avoid that, and it exists because some of the groundwork has already been done for us. Last year, the United Video Game Workers Union was formed, and I'm just gonna let their words speak for themselves. The video game industry is not sustainable for its workers. We pour our hearts and souls into game development for less pay and worse hours than we can get in other fields, and with no say in how these games are produced and sold. What's more, this industry is notorious for mass layoffs, mismanagement, and unrealistic crunch deadlines and bigoted culture. UVW-CWA finds all of these practices and more reprehensible and in need of change. Game studios take advantage of our passion and love of game making to make massive profits, all while viewing us, the workers who create the very games from which they profit, as disposable. We demand an industry free of harassment, with fair hours, fair pay, and not to be discarded at the whim of shareholders. We are not disposable, and our work should be respected. We, the workers, are not outnumbered, we're just not organized. Yet. Let's change this industry together. I absolutely couldn't have said it better myself. I tried, and that's why this video is 47 hours long. Brevity is the soul of wit, they say. I believe that this is the weapon we have to wield against the corporate egregores eating away at the art we all love. And of course, this is just a start. It only covers like North America, I believe. But we have to start somewhere. We have to stop thinking that video games are just this silly thing that's fine if it falls apart. Like, sure, we could just forever feel nostalgia for an experience we'll never come close to feeling again, over and over with every game we've ever loved. I miss Prime Arc and Destiny 1 so fucking bad, I think about it every single day. And I'm not saying we should look back and live our lives in the past. I'm saying we need to learn from the past and create a future where incredible games are possible. And for that to happen, we need to lock in and start taking this shit more seriously. We need to see legislation that actually tackles the issues in the industry. presented by serious people willing to do the work necessary to protect this art we all cherish. I envision a future where we gamers collectively decide to only buy games that are officially recognized by credible gaming unions, where recognized games get to be priced in a way that accurately reflects the effort required to create them and takes care of the creative people behind them. A future where microtransaction-based revenue gets massively taxed and healthy monetization structures get kickbacks or subsidies. A future where an expensive game cannot afford to be released in a bad state and to be refunded because each refund is that much more costly. Cyberpunk should have never been released in the state it was upon its initial release. Everyone knows that, and there were sweeping refunds to back that up. But I believe that if the ground-level developers had any say in the matter, Cyberpunk would have been pushed back in favor of releasing something they could be proud of. Arguably the game that exists now, which is in a considerably better state. At the end of it all, games should be more expensive. And those expenses should directly fund the people with vision, talent, and creativity. Now, if you've made it this far in this video, and you still disagree with me about Nightreign, and you've been aware this whole time of the bet I made at the beginning, where I will play another round of Nightreign for everyone who still disagrees with me by the end of this video, well, I have one last thing to say to you. If you love Nightreign, and think it's a good game, and think it was worth playing and worth its price tag, and worth all of the copy-pasting, don't you think it would be an even better game if it were to be $100, under the hypothetical circumstances I've just laid out? If Nightreign is a good game, and a good concept for a game, don't you also wish that it was $100, and released as a game worth $100, either by having considerably more content, or by having been made by people free from crunch time, in a less stressful environment, or by just having the time and labor necessary to create unique assets for the game itself that specifically play well within the roguelike model? And don't you wish the relic system shipped with the quality of a $100 game, alongside other carefully crafted systems of progression? Therefore, don't you see that the price tag itself for what we got is a problem? If the concept was worth doing at all, don't you think it was worth doing right? There's been a cultural shift recently in regards to Nightreign, where people's opinions of it have changed from "it's just dumb, thoughtless fun" to "it's the potential game. It has absolutely tons of potential that has been left on the cutting room floor because FromSoft refuses to update it." However, I see this as nothing but cope modified by hindsight. The feeling you're experiencing isn't that Nightreign had tons of potential. That would be a euphemism for the reality of the matter, which is that Nightreign was disappointing. You were disappointed that your favorite company would ship something so incomplete and incompetent. You were disappointed that they wouldn't flesh out the cheap concept they sold to you as a quick cash grab. But the reality is, they were never going to do that. And I, for one, knew it from the beginning, and I warned of this a year ago before being cast aside as a pointless pessimist. At the end of the day, Nightreign was just a cash grab. A game with no greater vision behind its design. They just copy-pasted a bunch of shit together which on its own wouldn't sell, and so they slapped a shitty boss at the end of it behind a 40-minute run-back smokescreen that stifles any potential criticism for being lazy, simplistic fights and decent characters in order to pretend that this product was good enough to sell for $40. Now you all might think at this point that this video was a criticism of Nightreign, to which you would be mistaken. There would be no point in criticizing Nightreign because it is immune from criticism, because we all know that Nightreign is a fun, bad game. And so, the point of this video was instead to ask the question, why is it a fun, bad game when it could have been a fun, good game? Why did FromSoft, at the height of their success, at the height of their financial ability, release something so undeniably lazy? Because that's really what's wrong with Nightreign. Not the game itself, but the laziness, the asset reuse, the price tag, the rushed obligatory cash grab idea of making a roguelike just because they're popular right now. The problem with Nightreign is that FromSoft sold out, and used this moment as an experiment to see just how far they could push our allegiance to them. But we are not guinea pigs, we are not game testers. We are just fans of FromSoft games. And if you agree, then you admit that Nightreign should have been handled better. It should have been made with a more experienced team. It shouldn't have reused so many assets. It should have been made with more vision and more confidence. And if you agree with any of that, well, then wouldn't you also say there's something wrong with Nightreign?